Hey everybody, welcome to the NFL Draft on Purple Insider presented by FanDuel. Happy to have everybody here. We have talked about this for weeks and weeks and weeks, and the night has finally arrived. The Minnesota Vikings on the clock in a couple hours with the 18th overall pick, but we will be breaking down every single draft selection on the way. We'll get your takes, your reactions, thoughts. We'll hear from Dane Mizutani from TCO Performance Center. Manny Hill is going to jump on later on in the evening, and I've got a video essay to begin the show with that I'm going to bring you in just a second. I did want to make a quick request that in the chat, if we can avoid tipping the picks until they come on the TV, that would be great, because I'm trying to, for those who are just watching TV and then listening to me, not give away what they're seeing on television first. So I've got the TV here. I've got the beast from Dane Brugler. I've got a draft board set up so we can show it to you. I've got profiles of every single player. We're ready to go, man. So off we go. But I want to begin with an essay that I wrote and produced to try to capture the Minnesota Vikings 2026 draft. So off we go. Let me begin our 2026 NFL draft coverage by asking a question. How are we supposed to approach a draft that the Minnesota Vikings so desperately need to go their way? Vikings fans know all about anxiousness and nervous energy when it comes to these drafts. There have been selections in the past that have changed Minnesota sports forever in a good way, and there have been picks that never turned out to be as good as everyone dreamed on draft night. The hits and misses have shaped Vikings' recent history as much as any other time in the franchise's existence. Just like in 1998 when picking Randy Moss put the Vikings in the driver's seat in the NFC, Justin Jefferson's fall down the board in 2020 and Christian Darrisaw's slide in 2021 set the Vikings up with foundational stars to build around. Yet in recent drafts, they have come up short, putting them in a hole that they are still trying to climb out of. Some recent picks gave them so much hope and yet so much uncertainty at the same time. One of the reasons that the Vikings are being led by a new general manager during tonight's draft is because of the failures of the past. Look up and down the depth chart and you won't find very many Kwesi Adofo-Mensah draft picks that you can say are key pieces to the 2026 Vikings and beyond. That has to change now. The Vikings have uncertainty all over the roster after 2026 and even this season as well. Who's on the offensive line? Who's in the backfield? Who's playing tight end? Who's on the D-line? Edge rusher, corner, safety, all over the roster. Brzezinski, Kevin O'Connell, and Brian Flores would love to solve all of these current and future issues in round one, but that's not how the draft works, and that's what makes the Vikings situation tonight so interesting. Are the Vikings going to make a big swing for the 2026 roster? Is Kevin O'Connell going to push for players who can help right away because he's under pressure following the Sam Darnold debacle? Or will Brzezinski, a longtime employee of the franchise, urge the front office to look toward the future? Brian Flores returned to the Vikings after a contract debate this offseason. Does he have more sway upon his return, or will they keep asking him to squeeze the most blood out of the stone? He has only had one top 100 draft pick since he arrived at TCO Performance Center in 2023. Are the Vikings going to view this as a trial period for the next GM? Will Brzezinski's impression on the front office and ownership make all the difference? Will the owners be studying how he manages the board? Those are just some of the questions facing the Vikings. Are they interested in Oregon safety Dylan Thieneman after everyone in the mock draft universe connected him with the Vikings this offseason? Does Harrison Smith's uncertain status impact that decision making? Could they make an aggressive move up the draft board to pick one of the only few blue chip players in the draft, or will somebody trade down with them? Is Jonathan Grenard still on the table for a potential trade? And what would it take for a team to get him? Or could he be a chip in a bigger move? What about all the potential targets and all the questions that follow? Jermod McCoy reportedly has a knee issue, but he might be the best cornerback in the draft. Akeem Mesidor is 25 years old, but he demolished college football last year. Spencer Fano has short arms. Some of the wide receivers supposedly aren't fast enough, or supposedly aren't tough enough, or don't give good enough interviews, or whatever critique it might be. There's a tight end who has the most freakish combine out there, but didn't catch as many passes as you might expect last year. His range of outcomes is as wide as any player in the draft. And then there's other teams' questions that will impact the Vikings. The Giants are now picking twice in the top 10 after dealing for Dexter Lawrence. Will Jeremiah Love make it to them? Will they rebuild on their defense with some Ohio State talent, or do they have different plans? Will any other quarterback be taken in the first round? Will the teams before the Vikings take the players that they might covet the most? Will the Lions improve their O-line? Will the Bears improve their D-line? The drama and the domino effects of the NFL draft are unmatched, my friends. The energy is high as the Vikings have 4 picks out of the top 100 this year and opportunities to maybe get even more. So we find out where it all begins tonight. Welcome everyone to Purple Insider's coverage of the 2026 NFL Draft. Let's go football. And off we go, folks, into the NFL Draft 2026, and the Minnesota Vikings are in such an interesting and unique spot. When we have looked at all the mocks, they have one particular player that has loaded up for most people's pick, and that is Dylan Thieneman. And I wanted to bring you a couple different things here before we get fully into it, and then we'll start to get your takes as the picks are coming off the board and all that. We'll have a really good time. But Dylan Thieneman has been the main discussion around the Minnesota Vikings, and I saw 15 more mocks come out today with Thieneman to the Minnesota Vikings. If you missed it, Chris Trapasso, great draft analyst, formerly of CBS Sports, does the Chris Trapasso draft show each week leading up to the draft here on Purple Insider. We talked about Dylan Thieneman's fit with the Vikings. And even though it's gotten a little bit dull, and even though I've pushed back against the idea at times, Chris said he likes the idea.
So is Dylan Thieneman. And I feel like even though it is a new general manager, Rob Brzezinski's been in the Vikings organization for a long time. He, among everyone that's been there in Minnesota, knows the presence and the impact and the value of having maybe a low positional value guy at safety, but what he can do to your defense when you have that player that is really a game changer. And Harrison Smith has been that guy for over a decade. So I think if he's there, he will be the pick for the Vikings, but you might win that hedging a little bit because he just might not be there because he's that good of a prospect. Safeties and off-ball linebackers, I mean, we have just not seen that many go. And I probably said it 10 times on this show the last 5 years, like, oh man, how did Derwin James fall? How did Kyle Hamilton fall? Those were like universally considered like top 3 to top 5 overall players in their respective classes, and they both went in the teens. And that maybe will speak ultimately to what happens with Dylan Thieneman, but 18 would be right in that range.
So the question is, will the Vikings take Dylan Thieneman because he fits an immediate need and is a very good prospect, or will they look toward 2027, tackle, wide receiver, edge rusher, even corner? You could say they don't need a starting player there right now. Roger Goodell is headed, by the way, to the stage at this moment. So time to get in your final takes right before the draft officially begins. And thank you to P. Gillick and Pizza Guy for the super chats. Not necessary, but very much appreciated. If you guys want to throw those in there tonight during the epic coverage. And yes, several of you have asked, I am well loaded up with Diet Dr. Peppers this evening. We'll also get, Dane Mizutani in here, Manny Hill. So it won't be just me and you for the entire night. And producer Jonathan Harrison is keeping an eye on reaction and breaking news, and he will pop in when we have those things as well. So to the 2027 question, I asked that of the acting general manager, Rob Brzezinski, earlier this week at his pre-draft press conference. And let's just say I was able to maybe use an eyebrow raise after listening to his answer.
Rob, when it comes to 2027 now to the future, you've kind of mentioned that a few times when we've chatted with you. How difficult is it when you're going into a draft to try to project a year forward, even though you know that whoever you bring in will need development time and things like that? Like, how do you weigh the future projections?
We were just in a meeting before we came down here, and that's part of it. You're always trying to balance that. And such a big thing in our league is having a path for your draft picks to play, especially your early picks. You want them on the field. And that's ideal. But there's also a world where you have to identify what the role is year one, but also what the bigger picture is, down the line. And so it's always a balance. And that's what we're talking about, what our needs are, in 2026. And then what our needs are in 2027 are two very different things. And so it's a process of, balancing those two things.
So there was Rob Brzezinski answering my question. I wonder about how they have balanced those two things over the last couple of weeks, analyzing where they're going to go. Officially, I want to say if the Vikings do get Dylan Thieneman, it will kind of be like seeing your Christmas present before it gets opened. But at the same time, it's an N64, so you're going to like it. I think that Dylan Thieneman is an excellent prospect who would fit really, really well with the Minnesota Vikings. I like to deep dive into team building, numbers, free agency, all those things. And there's a lot swimming in my head when it comes to that, when analyzing the idea of drafting a safety. But at the same time, he is a very, very good football player, and we'll see if he even ends up being on the board when the Minnesota Vikings get there. So let's get your guys' thoughts as we fire this up, and I'm assuming at some point very soon they will announce Fernando Mendoza, but right now on the broadcast, it's pomp and circumstance. I see Hines Ward, we got all the Pittsburgh stuff, so we've got time for some takes and some questions as we start to get into it. So where to begin? Right away with football, Matt, no more garbage draft picks. It's funny you say that because really that was the center of my essay, I think, was kind of about how this is such a huge draft for the Minnesota Vikings that you put it very bluntly there in your comment, but I kind of said the same thing, that they have done well early in the draft in recent years. Donovan Jackson was a hit immediately last year. Dallas Turner took a big step forward. You have Jordan Addison, who on the field has turned into a really good football player. But when it comes to the bigger picture of the draft, they have not been successful as a franchise building through the draft. And when you look around and you start to do the math, and you come up with maybe 4 or 5 players that they've drafted that are even on the roster and look like they're ready to make a serious impact, unless there's big steps forward from some undrafted free agents. I mean, it's really been a lot of the guys who have filled out the back end of the roster. It's not just tonight, it's really the entire draft where they need to come away with starters right away and for the future, foundational players. And then they also need to come away with just some solid role players, some guys that have potential. You go back to 2020, I believe it was, when Josh Metellus was drafted. It wasn't until 2023 that he became a good player for them. And almost the same thing could be said for somebody like Cam Bynum. I know those are Rick picks, but that shows you that one draft has repercussions into the future, and you need to have players that have a possibility of developing, and they really haven't had the patience with those players or drafted guys that have seemed to have that potential in recent years. Pizza Gary says, please no tweeners, reaches, undersized. He went earlies or trade downs within reason. I mean, okay, so there's some exceptions there. Reaches kind of depends on the opinion, I suppose. Who is declaring it a reach? Are we talking about versus consensus boards, versus mocks, versus analysts? So reaches are tough to put a finger on sometimes. Tweeners can be good at times depending on the right guy. Like Keldrick Falk is kind of a tweener between a defensive tackle and outside linebacker, but I actually think he's a good football player and might be able to be a good contributor at one of those spots. And the trade downs within reason, I totally agree with, because there is a scenario for the Minnesota Vikings tonight where they get to 18 and there's just a lot of opportunity on the board to move down and pick up extra draft capital. And we were just talking about they don't just need stars and starters. They also need role players and developing guys that maybe 2 or 3 years from now could also be something. You can get more shots at that by trading down. So there's always an exception to every rule. Oh, and the undersized guys, if it's D'Angelo Pons, then you could take that one away, because the Indiana corner is one of my favorite players in the draft, despite not being the exact perfect size. I mean, there have been other players, Antoine Winfield, John Randall, throughout history of the Minnesota Vikings that weren't the perfect size, but they were great football players. So exceptions to every rule, but a lot of options on the board for the Minnesota Vikings. Just Another Dude says, the first time I saw Thieneman mocked to Minnesota, I absolutely hated it. And once I watched his tape and saw a million mocks taking him, now it's going to be weird if we don't. I totally agree with that. It is going to be a little bit weird if the Vikings don't end up taking Dylan Thieneman, because I think probably in the future, if that happens, by the way, the Raiders are on the clock right now. If that does not happen for the Vikings, if they don't get Thieneman in the future when they play him, I will absolutely refer to him as one-time Minnesota Viking because I've never seen anything like it. I really haven't. I mean, you go back to last year, a lot of people were mocking the Vikings offensive linemen, and Donovan Jackson was thrown out there. I think actually Kuiper was one of the ones that had Donovan Jackson, but it wasn't like there were 4,700 analysts who were all picking the same guy. It does just in my brain make me want to think, all right, like there's got to be a way to like figure out what this means, right? Does this mean that everybody knows the same thing, or that everybody is kind of just lazily throwing number 18 in there because it's not a very sexy draft pick? But you're right. I think during this time, there's a lot of attachment almost to the idea of Dylan Thieneman. Doomer says, going to be a long year of speculating who will be on the roster in 2027 and regretting not pushing the pedal all the way down in 2026. That is possible. But also I might say that we could look at the way Rob Brzezinski has handled this offseason, and we might end up be saying, well, it's a good thing that they didn't move this pick or that pick or trade up or trade for Dexter Lawrence or whatever else it might be to sacrifice the future. I don't know what the right decision was, because we can't go ahead and jump in our crystal ball and look 5 years in the future and see how it played out, because they could have moved more money this year. They could have extended more contracts and done more restructuring and things like that to sign a couple more free agents. And I don't actually know if they could have gotten Dexter Lawrence. The 10th overall pick is pretty darn valuable that the Cincinnati Bengals were willing to give up. But maybe if you gave up enough other draft capital, but then you're kind of doing the same thing that they had done to get themselves in this position right here, right now. So maybe they'll end up in the playoffs and you'll say, gosh, if you just had that one more defensive tackle. Or maybe 2 years from now, you'll say, thank goodness you didn't give up the 18th overall pick because Dylan Thieneman became a 4-time Pro Bowler or something like that. So we don't know, right? But that's the way that they've decided to handle it, is with more of a long-term approach. And what I'm thinking about is how that might impact the number 18 overall draft pick. P. Gullick, I appreciate you, and the Diet Dr. Pepper Fund. Thank you. $5 buys like one Diet Dr. Pepper these days. So I don't know when we find out if Minneapolis gets the draft bid. I actually don't know. Glad you guys enjoyed the intro. I appreciate that. That was a lot of fun to put together. Dan says, first choice is Kenyon Sadiq. Second is Thieneman. If both gone, then trade down. Of course, it takes a team wanting to trade up, but there are a couple positions that might make that interesting, which is wide receiver and offensive tackle. If they start to go off the board and then the Vikings are sitting on a spot where there's a wide receiver or an offensive tackle to be taken, then we might end up seeing a team say, we need that receiver, we need that tackle, we're going to jump up and make a play with the Vikings. Here comes Roger Goodell to make the first pick of the 2026 draft. And this one is the only pick that was mocked more often than the Vikings and Dylan Thieneman. That would be Fernando Mendoza. So Roger Goodell announces the first overall draft pick in the 2026 NFL draft is indeed Fernando Mendoza, the Heisman winner, one of PFF's top quarterbacks, 41 touchdowns to 6 picks, and the national champion quarterback, 6'5", 230 something pounds. And with the Raiders specifically, they have already done a lot to put Fernando Mendoza in a positive position, which the Raiders franchise has not done very often for literally anyone to put them in a good spot to succeed. And Mendoza now gets to come into an organization with a coach who has been around a lot of different organizations, a lot of different coaches. He just won the Super Bowl with an excellent organization in Seattle. He was in Minnesota before. He was in San Francisco before, talking about Clint Kubiak. And then right away, I know it's a meme and I know it's been a bit of a laughing stock, but right away, they go and get Kirk Cousins to be the bridge quarterback there, which I think just could not be better for Fernando Mendoza. Kirk knows the offense inside and out, and I think he's also at a point in his career where he is willing to look at himself and say, I can be a mentor. I don't have to be the guy who is QB1 who says it's not about the dollars, it's what the dollars represent and that sort of thing. He doesn't have to be that anymore. He can actually work with Fernando Mendoza to get him up to speed. And when he's ready to play, then he's ready to play. And when they can build the line, when they can build the receiving core and get their running game going with Ashton Genty, then Fernando Mendoza will be ready to start. So I think that they're handling this the right way, getting serious as an organization. And I also think that Mendoza has a higher ceiling than some people think because he is not mobile. He's not a scrambler, but he is huge. And that really is the difference between him and Kirk, that he's Daniel Jones type size and accurate and very intelligent and very diligent. And that stuff plays in the NFL. So I think he's been kind of treated as a second tier type of QB1, which I would have said that a lot more about Cam Ward than about Fernando Mendoza. It's been a meteoric rise for him this last year. But when you look at the way that he's developed the skill set with arm talent, toughness, intelligence, if he can run Clint Kubiak's offense, he's going to have a lot of success. So here's a look at our draft board for this evening, where I'll be filling in the picks and trades and whatever else may come. So Fernando Mendoza to the Las Vegas Raiders, and this is sticktothemodel.com, by the way, if any of you want to toy around with that. So the least surprising pick ever in the history of ever, and we'll get your guys' reactions and thoughts to that. And also, Dane Mizutani is supposed to join the show at some point here soon, and we'll get him in from TCO Performance Center. Actually, we have Dane. So let me get Dane here dialed up on the show just after Fernando Mendoza was picked, and we'll see what happens with the New York Jets. And we'll keep you updated on each pick while also talking plenty of Minnesota Vikings. So tonight, an interesting night. Dane Mizutani, welcome back into the show. An interesting night at TCO Performance Center. Dane, do you expect to be waiting around for a long time, as in trade down? Do you expect to be sitting there at 18 and the Vikings stick and pick? Do you expect that? Have you pre-written your Dylan Thieneman drafted by the Vikings article yet? What's your sense there?
Yeah, I feel like we're going to be making this pick in 2 hours. I think they're sticking and picking at 18. I understand, obviously, the idea of trading back if maybe you have 12 guys that you love and they're all gone by the time 18 rolls around. I just, it feels to me like everybody is saying that kind of mushy middle of the first round is all the same. So it's not always do the Vikings want to move back? It's, does somebody else want to move up to 18? And it kind of just feels like the talent across the board is pretty similar right now. So I think they're sticking and picking at 18. I hope they're sticking and picking at 18 because, shoot, like trading back 14 picks to 32 would just elongate the night. And I think we're all ready to figure out if it's Dylan Thieneman or if it's somebody else. I know I predicted Dylan Thieneman on the pod because I am a subscriber to Groupthink, but I'm very curious who it will be. It's obviously something that will shape the future of this franchise as we know it.
Well, groupthink or wisdom of crowds, it kind of depends which one. And Look, I think everybody makes a lot of sense when they're putting Dylan Thieneman and the Minnesota Vikings together, which just now, David Bailey of Texas Tech is the number 2 overall draft pick, the pass rusher who had some of the best numbers in college football this year. And oddly enough, wears nothing on his arms or hands. It looks very, very weird for somebody who's being drafted number 2 overall, but both teams at the top making some sense here with the New York Jets, just taking the best pass rusher. That's the type of player that you build around long term. But I played earlier on the show, Dane, Rob Brzezinski's answer about 2027 and potential options that they could look at that aren't necessarily to fill needs right away. Now, the interesting part about that is that you can make an argument that there's almost every position on the field. If you open the door to 2027, it's like very, very clever, Rob. That gives us no idea what you're talking about because safety makes sense short-term and long-term. But there are a few positions that only make sense for 2027. Tackle is one of them. Corner is sort of 50-50 because they have starting corners, but they don't have much depth there. And wide receiver is another one where certainly you can always have another wide receiver at the end, because you can target those guys and rotate those guys, but it's not an immediate need when you're picking up Jordan Addison's 5th-year option. So if I told you, if I went forward in time 3 hours and then came back and told you, Dane, they didn't pick a safety, what would you say they must have picked then?
See, I wasn't going to come on here and change my pick because I'll stand on business that I took Dylan Thieneman in a moment of pressure 72 hours ago in this same room. But I think if you fast forward 3 hours and tell me they stayed at 18, they did not take him, I don't know if he's going to be there. But if he is, I think it's because they took Kenyon Sadiq. And that's the name. I said it earlier this week. That popped in my head when Rob Brzezinski said, just because they won't be a contributor in 2026 doesn't mean they can't be a cornerstone in 2027. That sounded like Kenyon Sadiq to me. The problem with that, obviously, is he has to get past the Los Angeles Rams, who run 13 personnel almost exclusively now, it feels like. He has to get past the Baltimore Ravens. He has to get past the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But I ran a few mocks like everybody has, and I've looked at almost all the mocks that I at my disposal, and Kenyon Sadiq gets to 18 in a lot of the time. So I could see that. I think it would make sense. I think that probably fits more into the kind of typecast of player that you were talking about, where it's almost exclusively for 2027. I think if they took Kenyon Sadiq, they'd obviously find ways to get him the ball, and they'd find ways to make that pick worthwhile in the short term. But I think if you're making that pick, it's because you're projecting out, you're giving him kind of a slow ramp way. It was the cliche, and the cliche has kind of gone by the wayside as tight ends have hit the ground running immediately in the NFL. But it was before you're learning 2 positions. It's really hard to make an impact right away. Well, if they were to take him, TJ Hawkinson's still under contract. Obviously, it feels like he's downturning in his career, but maybe he can channel something for 2026, and then you can kind of have a full runway for Kenyon Sadiq to hit the ground running in 2027. So if they do what Rob Brzezinski has said and take the best player available, and he's the best player available, I think it could be him.
There was a particular word that Rob used that made me think maybe it is him, and that was unique. And when he said unique, I thought, there really is no tight end who is exactly like Kenyon Sadiq. It actually even rhymes with unique, but there are not guys who are 240 pounds that run 4.39s. Most of the time, those guys are actually like outside linebackers or something. And I think he had a 43-inch vertical. And this is just unreal athletic stuff. And he did lead Oregon in receiving, but didn't have crazy, crazy numbers like you might expect for someone that athletic. Outside of, how I'll put it this way, I think Sadiq is the one that would scare people the most because he is more of a projection. And I think Thieneman would be the pick that everyone would feel the safest about. Like, okay, you just got your regular guy and he's going to slot right in and it should be fine. If I was looking for a safe player and a risky player that were not those two, then who would you have in mind?
I think like a safe player, that probably wouldn't get people really that excited, but he's probably going to be a pretty good player in the NFL. Just with the tape we've seen, the projections of what we've heard, is a guy like Caden McDonald from Ohio State. Like, I think he could come in and be like a 2-down guy right away that could make an impact in the interior of the defensive line. Like, it's not sexy. I don't think it would get people like super jacked up and, screw those plus 550 FanDuel projections. I'm betting the Vikings to win the NFC North. But I think he would be a safe player that could contribute on defense. I think like the opposite end of that spectrum, like somebody that would make people a little nervous, or just like, I guess what I'm about to say also fits into like the safe category, but it would be polarizing, is if one of the tackles fell. Like if a Spencer Fano fell, if a Monroe Freeling fell, like I think that would bother people, because I think fans want any first round pick, like, but certainly some, number 18. And after we've talked about it for so long, they want that guy to have a pathway to the field right away so you can get excited about them. Not only would you be drafting an offensive lineman, which never gets people that excited, like Donovan Jackson, good player. I don't think people were jazzed up about that pick last year. You would basically be saying, unless you're going to like trade Brian O'Neill or cut him, like that, this guy we take at 18 is not going to play until next year. Right, so right. I guess I listed 2 safe players, but I think if you were to walk away from the draft and Spencer Fano fell, and some people think he's the best tackle in the draft, and if you get him at 18, like probably just do it. I don't know how excited people would necessarily be in the short term, though in the long term, I think it could be maybe the best pick on the board for them.
Real quick, thanks to Ronan for the super chat. Appreciate that. And the number 3 overall pick is in, and already a little bit of a surprise. The buzz started to gain over the last couple of days. Jeremiah Love to the Arizona Cardinals, who continue to not really have any idea what they're doing. And this feels like a lot of Ashton Genty to the Raiders, where you are several years early on this draft pick. This is Ricky Williams going to the New Orleans Saints, not with the huge trade, but the superstar running back to the horrible team is a very tough sell for me, and they are in a really, really tough spot. The Cardinals are in their rebuild, and they add a running back to the backfield. We've seen a lot of these guys, Christian McCaffrey in Carolina and Saquon Barkley, where they went to bad organizations and they ended up being bigger stars in other places than they did for those teams. And even Bijan Robinson, as great as he's been, their team has not made the playoffs since they drafted Bijan Robinson. So already a bit of an odd pick from a team building perspective, but all those dreams of Jeremiah Love going to the Minnesota Vikings in a trade up, nope. So much for that, Dane.
I was talking to some people earlier. I went on the radio in South Dakota earlier. You know Nate Brown, great guy.
Oh, yeah.
He was like, would they trade up? And I was like, I don't think they would trade up unless Jeremiah Love somehow got to like 10. I said, I don't think he's getting to 10. He's certainly not getting to 10 now. No. Like it was a fun thing to talk about for a while, because I do think like getting into kind of like the psychology of the run game and Kevin O'Connell and the way he is going to be willing to rely on it, that you probably need like a generational talent in that backfield for him to be comfortable giving that guy the ball on 2nd and 10, staring down the barrel of 3rd and long. So Jeremiah Love, he was always the pipe dream. Seemed like that thing went away pretty quick tonight.
But what about Caleb Downs? Is that possible, you think?
See, I don't think so, because I think like some people have him as the best player in the draft. Like if he's there, yeah, take him. Like that would be like you'd fill kind of multiple buckets there, check multiple boxes there, because people think you need a safety. You do need a safety, and he's a special talent. There's always a guy every year, and often multiple guys that are supposed to be high draft picks, and then they fall, and then it's really sad because they're in the green room and they're still falling. I didn't think it was going to be Jeremiah Love. It's not. I don't think it's going to be Caleb Downs. Maybe like if the medicals aren't right for a guy like Jordan Tyson, like maybe he'd be there for you at 18. But there's also been steam that that certain teams love him. So in a couple of hours, we'll know who that guy was that fell. I just don't think it'll be Downs.
I am interested to see where Jermod McCoy ends up and whether there's been smoke screening in regards to his medicals, because oftentimes, as you mentioned, guys will slide down and we won't hear anything about it till after the draft. And then it's like, oh, okay, that's why that guy slid. But this was pre-draft and everyone seemed to know about his knee injury. So how serious is that really? Or how much is somebody putting it out there like, you better stay away from him because he needs to get to number 18. Not that I'm accusing the Vikings of doing that. So he's on my radar. One more thing before you head back to the media room there. Dane, is Rob Brzezinski in his handling of this draft tonight? My confidence in Rob is extremely high in handling a circumstance like this because, well, one, I mean, even just the way that he has talked to us and presented himself as a general manager, I have bought it. I mean, I've felt very much like this is a guy who understands how to be in charge of these rooms and understands the discussions that need to be had, the pitfalls that could potentially befall a team that doesn't put their board the right way or make the right process en route to getting their board set. But how do you feel like Rob is going to approach this that might be different from things we've heard in the past from Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah?
Yeah, I do think he's going to lean heavily on his experts. I think he has expertise in this field. He's been doing this in some way, shape, or form since 1999, at least for the Vikings. He's knowledgeable. He's a great talent and evaluator. He's not just some cap guru who hangs out in his office and crunches numbers. Like, I think he has a good eye for talent as well. But I think he understands his shortcomings and understands that, like, some of these guys around him, or some of these guys and girls around him, like, this is their job. They go out there, they scout, they're boots on the ground in these areas. And listening to Rob talk, and I think this kind of just speaks to his leadership, but I also think it somewhat tips his hand about how he's going to handle this. Is he's talked a lot about just being grateful to work with the entire collection of people that the Vikings have. So I think first and foremost, my confidence level in Rob would be rooted in the fact that I don't think he's going to just try and galaxy brain this thing and prove he's the smartest guy in the room, which I liked Kwesi. I thought he, like, when we did get to talk to him, we didn't get to talk to him very often, but like when we did, he came across as somebody like that I might get along with outside of the building. But like, I think there was an element of, I have every answer. And sometimes that maybe tended to get away from just the process of what you've done up until this point. And I think that's interesting because I think, like, we'll turn the page on Saturday on the 2026 NFL draft, and these people will start working on the 2027 NFL draft. It's a constant cycle. So all the information that Rob has at his disposal, I think he will use, which gives me confidence. And the last thing I would say is just the way he's talked about just being objective about the draft board, stacking it. Just objectivity is a word he's used since he took over for Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah. And he explained it in a way the other day, earlier this week, which I thought was a real kind of good insight into the way teams fail sometimes, is that if you don't stack the board objectively, if you are trying to angle for this player, like, you're just going to see what you want to see from certain guys. And I think the Vikings might have done that at times over the past 4 years. Like, well, this guy is a talent I like. Let's move him a little higher because he fills a need. And I feel a certain way about him. I don't think Rob Brzezinski is going to let that happen. I think his skills as a leader in that room will allow hard conversations to be had, but ultimately at the end of the day, at 18, a consensus to be made. And then for the other 8 picks in the draft, obviously they could trade some, and maybe it's not a 9-pick draft, but for every pick they make, I think they will have reached a consensus because of Rob. I have a ton of confidence in how he's going to handle this, and whether he's going to be the guy to oversee the rise of these guys. We'll see. They'll do a GM search pretty intently and pretty, I think, expeditiously right after the draft. But this is Rob's time to shine, and I think he will.
I think trust is probably the key word from the front office, the coaches in Rob Brzezinski, based on his experience and leadership skill. Carnell Tate goes number 4 to the Tennessee Titans. That was one that not many people mocked Tate that high, but surprisingly, I think the Tennessee Titans just made a really good move to get a top weapon for their quarterback who had basically nothing to work with last year. Dane Mizutani from TCO Performance Center. Go get yourself ready for the big trade up that the Vikings are going to do for Caleb Downs or something here in a few minutes. Thanks so much for popping on and for all the times that you've come on through this whole process. NFL Combine, owners meetings, press conferences, breaking it all down with me. I appreciate you, man. And we'll be talking again very soon.
If they trade up for Caleb Downs, I'll hop back on an emergency basis.
All right. It's a deal.
All right.
Thanks, Dane.
Have a good one.
All right, there you go. Dane Mizutani, the Pioneer Press. Carnell Tate is indeed the 4th overall draft pick. And thank you to Blue Stork for the super chat. And says, have not been paying attention since the end of the season. What basics should I going into tonight? I would say, Blue Stork, just sit back and enjoy the ride, because I can't tell you everything right now. That's the best I could do. Let me get Jonathan Harrison in here, because we have some breaking news in the draft. We've got a trade up, another one that had been signaled a lot leading into this. Jonathan, what do we got for a trade up?
Yeah, Ian Rappaport reporting Browns and Chiefs are deep in talks on a trade to send Kansas City up to number 6 overall and Cleveland back to number 9.
Okay, do we have any sense of what they would be doing that for? I mean, Arvell Reese is still on the board. He was a guy that was projected to go number 2 overall, number 3, number 4. I mean, everywhere at the top. And he and Sonny Styles both on the board still. Caleb Downs still on the board at the moment. It seems like they would be doing this for defense, because there doesn't look like there's a wide receiver that would be potentially in the mix.
Yeah, unless you're reaching for Tyson, but that feels a little bit early at this point. But yeah, that trade is official now. Everybody else reporting it, Phil Yates, Adam Schefter. So Chiefs now at number 6 now.
Okay. All right. Very interesting. Thank you, Jonathan Harrison. Jonathan will be paying close attention to everything going on with trades, breaking news, stuff like that, as we go throughout the night, and also reaction as well. That we'll get when we get to maybe after about 10 picks. We'll see what Jonathan's been seeing as far as reaction, because I can't read your messages, watch TV, talk to you, and look at Twitter at the same time. I know I'll try to be better. I will try to be better. Let's take a look at the board and what the board looks like currently. Now, in that number 6 slot is, instead of Cleveland, it is now the Kansas City Chiefs. So the best players available at this moment: Arvell Reese, Caleb Downs, Sonny Styles, all 3 Ohio State players. Ruben Bain as well is one of the most interesting prospects in this draft. And they gave up number 74 and 141 to move up. So that may give us a little bit of an indication of what the price tag might be if a team wants to move up with the Vikings at some point in the draft. Like, would it be a late 2nd or an early 3rd? But best players on the board, Ruben Bain is one of the most interesting in this entire draft, because he does have shorter arms and he is a little bit of a tweener, but he had tremendous production this year for Miami. And anybody who watched college football, you would have watched Ruben Bain and said, this guy is a monster. And once we get into draft season, sometimes it feels like we're just overthinking this. But at the same time, he would have basically the shortest arms of any person to play that position, which makes you think that the NFL might hesitate. They do that sometimes when it comes to stuff like this. So we're going to find out very shortly who the Kansas City Chiefs traded up to get. But right now, the New York Giants are on the board with their first of 2 top 10 draft picks. And I think if you're the Giants, you are absolutely thrilled, because you can get any of those Ohio State guys that you want. You could get Bain. The options are all over the place for them to continue to build up their defense. Bain might not quite fit with their defensive ends unless he was going to play DT, but the other guys, linebackers, they're a little bit weak there. Safety, they could use another guy. So the New York Giants have plenty of options here, but nothing has been different than expected in terms of the players. Maybe the order has already been not what we expected because you have Jeremiah Love going so high, and a lot of people had him 4, and then Carnell Tate going higher than he was expected to go. But these players were expected to be top 10, so nothing shocking yet so far. So let's get back to your guys' reactions. Matt says, seemed like Bain won on speed against bad tackles most of the time. NFL guys will get hands on him and the short arms will show up. I think that might be true for a guy who was like the 20th best prospect. I don't know if that'll be true for someone like Ruben Bain. Like, arm length definitely matters, but it feels like it's a thing that could be overrated, that his quickness against bigger guys, his power, his motor, his determination, and I think we also know this about this year's draft, is that these guys are not going to be perfect. It's not a blue chip draft. It's not 1998 where you have Charles Woodson and Peyton Manning or something like that. This is a draft where you have to hold your nose a little bit when you make these picks. Like you just have to kind of do that sometimes, where it's going to be like, well, he's not going to be perfect. And this goes for 18 too. The guy's not going to be perfect. And yet you're also, maybe going to find someone who can really help your team. So if Ruben Bain turned into a plus run defender who got 7 or 8 sacks a year, that might end up being good for this draft. The New York Giants going with Arvell Reese with the number 5 overall pick. So it will be fascinating to see what they decide to do in terms of Arvell Reese's role. Will he be an edge rusher? I don't think so, because they have Brian Burns and they have Abdul Carter, who they picked last year. And here's the thing about the New York Giants. So they've been a comedy act, no question about it, for a very long time. Now that John Harbaugh's there and they just traded for more draft capital and they've just got another young prospect, I mean, how many top prospects can they stack together? If Jackson Dart turns out to be decent, Arvell Reese, Abdul Carter, Malik Neighbors, I mean, this team is getting stacked with top talent if they can make it work. So kind of we've talked about this before on the show through the years, like the accidental tank. And it feels like they have kind of gone through a little bit of the accidental tank. Like they never meant to be here, but here they are. So the 6th pick is going to be the Kansas City Chiefs, and we'll find out momentarily who they traded up to get. The best players on the board right now: Caleb Downs, Sonny Styles, Ruben Bain, Mansour Delane is an interesting one, Francis Maui-Noah, Spencer Fano, Mekhi Lemon. The fact that Carnell Tate went early might be some sort of indicator that wide receivers could go earlier. Let's take a quick look at the FanDuel odds, and they are updating as we go along. So they've got right now number 9 through 16 pick in terms of odds. And I'm curious who they think could get to the Vikings. Like the number 16 players that they're mentioning on the odds here on FanDuel are Omar Cooper Jr., Vega Ioane, Dylan Thieneman, Mekhi Lemon, Caden Proctor, Kenyon Sadiq, all those players. I mean, if all those players drop to 16, then that means that somebody is going to end up being there at number 18 for the Vikings. But we'll see who the Chiefs trade up for. Again, still, it's chalky, but not exactly how everyone expected it. And that's why the mock drafts are a lot of fun, but sometimes it's like, you just don't know. You just don't know. There was hints late in the process that Arizona would do it. I was actually surprised because I thought that is a classic smokescreen, that they're trying to get someone to trade up to 3, but then they did it. And that's the one pick that I would not say is the best in terms of team building. I think the rest of these make a lot of sense versus what the teams have done. So there's what your board looks like so far, and we'll keep you up to date on the best players available in the draft. And we will have Jonathan check in if we have any updates on trades or moves up. It was thought to be a draft that would be kind of filled with trades and different moves. And as of this, we get, one big trade right there. So, Rochambeau makes a good point. Yeah, Carter, Reese, Burns, and Thibodeau. There's word about potentially trading Thibodeau, but I guess maybe if the Vikings trade Jonathan Grenard, that was out there earlier today where there were a few people saying, hey, the odds are very high that they move Jonathan Grenard. I'm curious what you guys think of that, because so far we have not heard of that happening. And I kind of don't expect that to happen tonight, because I'm thinking that it would be much more of a tomorrow thing for the Vikings to get draft capital for day 2. But if they were to get day 1 draft capital from the Philadelphia Eagles, that would be incredible return if they could do it that way. But there is a little bit of, for me, with the Giants, now that they have a real head coach and they could start turning around the culture, a little bit of jealousy, because the way that they've built their team is through the young foundation that if it works, it's going to work for a really long time. And it doesn't always. And drafting Arvell Reese doesn't guarantee anything. But man, they've got a lot of high draft picks that they are building around. Hunter picking up a 3rd from the Browns and a 5th, only moving back 3 spots. And, if later on in the draft, if the Vikings can pick up a 3rd, even if you don't get the 5th, to move back 3 or 4 or 5 spots, I think they would be in great shape to do that. Bills, is always great to finally reach the draft after months of mocking. You're absolutely right, my friend. It is a ball to finally get these picks coming in and get the results after having so much speculation. Not that I don't enjoy the pre-draft process, but I was very ready this week. If Raj wants to move it back by a week, feel free, my friend. Garrett says, what do you think the odds are that Grenard gets moved today? No way we get a first for him. I agree. As the Chiefs pick is in, they traded up for Mansour Delane, the cornerback from LSU. Again, another player that was consistently mocked in the top 10, but was not necessarily mocked to go this high. And what we're already seeing is a lot of positional value here. And this is why I talked about it so much leading up to the draft, is that the NFL is doing a lot of work with the data. They've talked about it a little bit in press conferences. They've done a lot of studying of what brings the most value, what is the hardest positions to replace. They've all seen this stuff. And so we see a corner, the edge rusher go ahead of the off-ball linebacker, and then we'll see if Reese becomes kind of a hybrid there. But almost all of these picks, especially the 2 that have gone earlier, are those premier positions. And Caleb Downs on FanDuel was over under 9.5 for his spot. So, they got a sense for it heading up to the draft that maybe Downs might not go quite as high as he was projected, but I don't know that anyone had Mansour Delane being taken this high in the draft. But the Chiefs badly needed a corner. Both of their starting corners left actually for the Rams this offseason with the trade and then free agent signing. So they needed a guy. They needed a dude. And Mansour Delane has the best chance of becoming a shutdown corner, of which there are so few in the NFL these days. Thank you to Julian and to Skull Seattle for the super chats. Appreciate that. Is Washington taking Sonny Styles here? That's a good question, because now Styles, who was incredibly impressive at the NFL Combine, is on the board for a team that desperately needs defense. And this is where I am curious about how the defensive players end up playing out, because if all the defensive players come off the board, then, you might end up seeing Dylan Thieneman go earlier than he is expected. That I think is possible, right? If the defensive players go off the board and let's say Sonny Styles goes here, then the Dallas Cowboys might get to number 12 and say, we need a top defensive player. Let's go Dylan Thieneman. But they are the Dallas Cowboys, so are they going to do something flashy instead? Eric, longtime listener, first-time commenter. Well, welcome, Eric. Appreciate you joining. Anything telling for the Vikings yet or too far out to tell? Are we looking to trade up? The only thing that I would say is a little bit Vikings related, because all these players so far, everyone just had different orders, but everyone had these players going in the top 10. It's just, I'm not sure anyone had Kansas City trading up for Mansour Delane or even necessarily Jeremiah Love going to the Cardinals until 2 days ago when that started to percolate. And I guess people got good information there. So there wasn't much expectation in mocks that this is exactly how it would play out, but yet these are all the players that we didn't expect to be there for the Vikings. Where it becomes a little bit interesting is if, let's take a look at the board here. Let's go take a look at the board and see kind of how things might play out. So if Washington takes, and we'll see, I mean, the pick is already in, so we're going to figure this out. Well, so they're going to take either down Styles or Bain, somebody here. It might mean that there could be a player who we've mocked much higher, not getting there, and then slipping through the cracks to 10 or 11, where the Vikings might consider a trade up with someone like Miami. So there is a chance that one of the more blue chip-ish type of players slips through the cracks here and ends up available at 10 or 11. It really only takes one team reaching for that to happen, and then the Vikings would maybe consider making a trade up depending on who that player is. And I'm thinking about Caleb Downs here. Because if Styles goes, if Bain goes, if Maui Noa, we haven't seen a tackle yet. Spencer Fano, we haven't seen the wide receivers other than Tate go yet. So there's a lot of options that could allow someone to slide. I wonder what the Vikings would do if one of the best wide receivers made his way through this draft and got into that range just ahead of them, if they would consider making a move there. So, all right, the pick in for Washington, and they are going to go. All right, now they're doing a Walter Payton Man of the Year thing, but they're going to go Sonny Styles here. So say it, Raj. Say it, Raj. Okay, there you go. Sonny Styles to the Washington Commanders, and this is my favorite player in the entire draft, actually. I mean, of course, I like all the wide receivers best. All wide receivers are wonderful in my eyes. But Sonny Styles, I know he doesn't play. Thank you, Pepper. Really appreciate that. Thank you very much. Sonny Styles is a very, very unique guy. I think that his size-speed combination is something that you almost never see in the NFL. And if it clicks for him, he's going to be one of the best players in the entire league. If that happens, then this is a good pick to go with a linebacker, and he's got the potential to do it. That's what is interesting about this draft, is that teams, are kind of forced in a position to say, we might have to take a linebacker here. We might have to, take a Sonny Styles and Arvell Reese, maybe a Caleb Downs coming up very soon, because those are just the best prospects in this draft. And even though Sonny Styles is not a premium position and linebackers are easier to find, I watched a lot of Ohio State this year. His instincts, his coverage ability, his blitzing, his downhill, run defense, his ability to take on offensive tackles with his size and strength. He's one heck of a player. So Washington makes a plug and play type of selection to help rebuild their defense. Dave says, just got here. Did you see the rumor / leak that the Vikings have traded Grenard to the Eagles for a day 2 pick? I did, and you never really know when it comes to the pre-draft stuff, because I was joking about this a little bit last night about the NFL trade rumors website, where if you start to go through all the rumors, some of them have been right so far. The Jeremiah Love going to number 3. I think there was talk of Kansas City wanting to trade up, so that's been correct. But, there's going to be stuff that we didn't see coming for sure. I don't think anybody had Carnell Tate as the number 4 overall draft pick. I don't know that there was a whole lot of buzz for that to happen. So things can change. You might end up having a deal done with Grenard. It feels like there's been buzz for him to Philadelphia for months now since Adam Schefter put out that tweet. I guess it would have been over a month ago, in the first day of free agency. Schefter put out a tweet saying that the Vikings were looking to potentially trade Jonathan Grenard. And then I think it was Jeremy Fowler who said that the Eagles were interested. Since that happened, we have not really heard a lot. And then the buzz started to kick up a little bit more recently. I will wait to see if it actually happens or if it's something that has been kicked around, and then teams can always back out. Like you might have a verbal agreement and then someone might say, actually, we got a better option and we're going to move up. So it's not official until it's official, but if the Vikings trade Jonathan Grenard to Philly, I might not be super high on it, to tell you the truth, because I don't love the idea of helping the Philadelphia Eagles. I mean, they are a team where it looks like they're down a little bit in the mud if they're going to trade A.J. Brown to the New England Patriots. So they're already a little down, and they had drama last year. They were not as strong last year, and one of their big weaknesses was edge talent. So now this team that's been so annoying for the last couple years and so good is down in the mud, and you're reaching your hand down and saying, here, let me help you up with a Jonathan Grenard. I don't love that idea. And I know that you can't really always do it that way. I know that sometimes you have to just make the best deal that is on the table. And that's how you got to approach it. But gosh, can't you give him to, I don't know, Jacksonville? Like somebody where he can't hurt you. Even though they're not playing Philadelphia next year, it still feels like he's within hurting distance. And Grenard is a really, really good player. So, yeah, that's right. That's right. Not a twerk that there was a trade that was done for Max Crosby, and then there was a failed physical, and Grenard does have an injury that he's coming off. So he did end the year on IR. You never really know if these things are going to play out. There's a lot of trades that get talked about and even agreed upon, and then something happens. Sometimes a team misses the draft pick, for example, with the Vikings. Like, you never know until it's actually done. But I don't like it. I don't love it, because also I think that this team is good enough to have Jonathan Grenard help them win. But you could see from a financial perspective where they might be just saying, look, we don't want to give you a contract extension. We would much prefer to just maybe draft the next guy. If they are going to trade Grenard, the second round is filled with a lot of edge talent actually this year, or at least the projected second round. They could also go with someone this year like a Keldrick Falk. They could also go with Akeem Messidor. Those are two guys that have been thrown around out there. TJ Parker from Clemson. So there's good talent at the edge position in this draft, but with Kyler Murray at quarterback, it kind of feels like, are you sure you don't want to just one more time for kicks with the rest of the roster? But I could see where if Grenard's side is coming out saying, hey guys, we want a 32 million, let's just throw out a number, 32 million. It's not like I know the number, per year extension. Well, that's too much. That's too much to do. So the Vikings would have to go into it and make a financial decision. Not only that, but when it comes to Dallas Turner, that also has to be a consideration, because they noticed, just like you did last year, that when Dallas Turner was playing the role of Jonathan Grenard, then he was a lot better than when he was trying to play the role of Andrew Van Ginkel, which fits because that's what he had been for his entire career. Jim says Grenard for a few day 2 picks seems so cheap. I know the trouble is with trying to trade Grenard is that he is coming off an injury. He's also coming off of not a great season in terms of sacks. And we all know that pressures are more important, or I think more predictive is the right way. And they are important, but they're not more important, because people have said that over the year. Well, no, it's pressures that really matter. Well, kind of, but if you take the quarterback down 10 yards away from the line of scrimmage, I think that's pretty important. So he didn't have the best year. He has an injury. He wants more money. And, well, he is a good player. He's definitely not of the same caliber as someone like Dexter Lawrence, who went for 10th overall. Like, Dexter Lawrence is a top 5 player at his position. I would not say that for Jonathan Grenard, even though he is very, very good. Pepper, do draft day trades waive the physical component. Oh yeah, you're right. That is an interesting thought. Maybe they do if you're going to get it done, or maybe something happens beforehand that we don't hear about in order to get it done. But yeah, that's an interesting take there, because we've seen plenty of draft day trades get done. I mean, are you on draft day flying? That's a great question. Are you flying the player out to get that settled before you make the move? I think that might be the case, but you might also just be saying, look, we're going to take him because he doesn't have a serious injury. And then maybe you have some trust with the team you're making the deal with. Dan wants Grenard for a 4th rounder now and a 2027 second. I think that would be a really good deal for the Vikings. I don't know if Howie Roseman is going to be willing to do that. So on the board right now, the pick is in for the New Orleans Saints, and Raj is about to announce that they are going, yes, wide receiver Jordan Tyson goes to the Saints. How about all the folks who tried to make Jordan Tyson into a weakling that nobody would want? This does go to now 2 wide receivers have been drafted higher than expected and a corner. So could this drum up a little bit of potential move up possibility for some team in the back if the run on wide receivers presents itself for a trade up to the Vikings? That could be the case. Not that Tyson wasn't projected high. He was always projected high, but maybe not this high. So if that pushes another receiver up that a team feels like, well, we better do it now. And you're right, positional value is certainly winning so far, with Sonny Styles and Arvell Reese dropping a little farther than expected. Caleb Downs still on the board, and 2 wide receivers taken earlier than expected and a corner. So it is something that's very clearly being thought about and compared in this draft class. Yes, Mad Red, I totally agree with you. Thank you so much to the chat for not spoiling picks. You guys are doing a great job. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate you doing that, because it makes it so much more of an enjoyable experience for everybody watching to not have the picks showing up in the chat. So thank you very much for not spoiling. But, Tyson, when I watched him, there was a little bit of me when people started calling him soft that thought, maybe he'll drop to number 18. He is so shifty. He has amazing ability to go up and get the football. His quarterback play, along with some of the other QB play in this draft, not so exceptional to help out the wide receivers. And he was a guy that probably had the most receptions on throws where you're like, that wasn't a very good throw, but somehow you made an adjustment in the air. He's one of those guys that floats. Like, he goes up in the air and it looks like he's never going to come back down. There are basketball players who have that. Anthony Edwards has that. Michael Jordan, AI, Allen Iverson. And Jordan Tyson kind of has that. I don't know what it is. Like, it's not a vertical jump. It's something else, like a body control. He's a really good football player, and very cool to see the emotion on his face here right now, getting drafted in the top 10. This means so much to these guys who battle for such a long time. The Cleveland Browns now are on the board, and Tyson being taken is probably the first time that we would call it a reach, if you will. I don't think taking a wide receiver this high is a reach by any means, but he was not always mocked into the top 10. So Jordan Tyson goes there. This is another great decision by the New Orleans Saints, because they have Chris Olave, but are they going to pay him? What's his situation there? And they really like Tyler Shuck. They really, really like Tyler Shuck. And this is from talking to Nick Underhill, who covers the Saints. They feel like they found something as their starting quarterback. But if you don't give Tyler Shuck enough to throw to, and they traded Rashid Shaheed last year, so if they don't give him enough to throw to, he's not going to thrive. I don't think he's the type of quarterback that's just going to elevate everybody around him. So now they gave him a guy who can catch everything. Good yards after catch. He's super shifty, hard to tackle. People have talked about him going, down on the ground after he catches the ball too early. I mean, I'd prefer he not get hurt. So I don't know. Like, I don't need my wide receivers trying to fight through 4 tackles and fumbling the ball. Do the Browns go offensive tackle here? Well, the Browns were the team that was consistently connected to wide receivers. So now the 2 receivers are off the board. Would they go Mekhi Lemon, or is the NFL not as high on Mekhi Lemon as everyone else? Offensive tackle makes so much sense. There are no offensive tackles that have gone off yet, which I think speaks again to the positional value thing. While tackle is very valuable, left tackle is not clear in this draft. Maui Noah, Spencer Fano, Blake Miller. Like, there's a number of guys who are high draft picks potentially that are more of right tackles than they are left tackles in the NFL. So it would make sense, of course, and right tackle is a meaningful position, but it's not quite the same still considered in the NFL as left tackle. The receivers, though, for the Browns are pretty atrocious. As Hunter says, they're pretty bad. They should probably go with a wide receiver, but now we're kind of rolling with picks as the pick is in here for the Cleveland Browns. And we're starting to see, if they don't pick Caleb Downs, a little bit of a tumble. If Downs gets past 10, then all of a sudden, then we're talking. Then we're talking Minnesota Vikings as a potential option to trade up for Caleb Downs. So here is coming the pick with Spencer Fano. There you go. So the offensive tackle, that was a guy that I had talked about a lot. Really, really like Spencer Fano. This guy is very athletic. He kind of reminds me of Brian O'Neill. He plays hard. He's very, very athletic. And I think that Fano in general could even play guard if you needed him to. So that's the guy that, yeah, you're right, Hunter. My dream is dead. However, Caleb Downs still on the board. If he gets past the Giants, things are very, very interesting with Caleb Downs. Would he go to Dallas, maybe? Would the Vikings try to trade up to get him, potentially? It becomes quite interesting. So let's take a look over at the draft board here now and the best players available. So if you just tuned in, here's what it looks like. Fernando Mendoza to the Raiders. David Bailey going to the New York Jets. Jeremiah Love picked 3rd to the Cardinals. Carnell Tate to Tennessee. Arvell Reese is picked by the New York Giants. Mansour Delane, the Chiefs trade up for him. Sonny Styles goes 7th to Washington, and Jordan Tyson to the New Orleans Saints, and now Spencer Fano. So best players available there on the right side: Caleb Downs, Ruben Bain, Francis Mauigoa, Mekhi Lemon, Kenyon Sadiq, Vega Ioane, Jermod McCoy we'll see, and then some other tackles like Monroe Freeling, Caden Proctor, Keldrick Falk, Dylan Thieneman. A lot of talent on the board here with only a few spots to go before things start to get very interesting for the Minnesota Vikings. So at what point would you say that the Vikings would have to consider trading up if Caleb Downs drops? At what point? I think 11. I think that if this pick, well, we got the pick already. Francis Mauigoa going to the Giants, a tackle to the New York Giants. That's interesting. They just brought, well, they might be drafting him to be a guard, actually, right away. They might be drafting him to be a guard potentially. So that is an interesting pick because they have 2 offensive tackles. Thank you. I shot you 99. Appreciate that for the super chat. Is taking Love at 3 really that bad of an idea for the Cardinals? O-line at 3 seems like a reach. Nothing wrong with BPA. It's when will he matter is my question. When will he matter? We have a trade. Let's get Jonathan Harrison in here. What's our trade?
Yeah, Steven in the chat also has it, but Mike Garafolo from NFL Network saying the Cowboys are trading up 1 spot to number 11, or a couple spots up to number 11.
Oh, okay. So this could be Caleb Downs. Thank you very much, Jonathan Harrison, producing tonight. This could be Caleb Downs. I would assume that is what they're doing here to trade up to get their defensive player. Okay, hold on. Let's get what's the trade package, Jonathan?
Dolphins are getting pick 12, 177, and 180 for the Cowboys to move up 1 spot.
Okay, so that's not that much for them to move up 1 spot. That's a pretty good trade if they're going to get Caleb Downs. And if you are Miami, I mean, what do you care? because you're not taking a safety when you need absolutely everything. They should be looking to take, I think they should be looking to take Mekhi Lemon or one of the wide receivers to build their offense. It could be Ruben Bain. Yeah, no, that's a good point. Doesn't have to be Caleb Downs. If this is not Caleb Downs, then I think the Vikings have to at least pick up the phone. I mean, Caleb Downs is the guy that we've been talking about. Hey, maybe, Dylan Thieneman could become this, that, or the other thing, but Downs is the one that is a Harrison Smith prototype. He's a little bit smaller than Harrison Smith, but in terms of the football IQ, he is supposed to be the smartest player in the draft this year. And also, he is a rock solid run defender, tackler, plays with his hair on fire, makes plays on the football. If this isn't Caleb Downs, then the Vikings have to be at least thinking about it, because if you built a player in a lab for Brian Flores, I think Caleb Downs would be that type of player. But also, Pepper, could this increase the odds of the Vikings getting Thieneman? If Caleb Downs goes here to the Cowboys, then yes, it does increase the odds. But the odds are, I think, decent right now that Kenyon Sadiq and Thieneman could potentially be on the board. Or would Miami take Kenyon Sadiq because he might have the highest ceiling of anyone? The drama is happening, my friends. But I got to say to the New York Giants, I know that they gave away Dexter Lawrence, and that's pretty tough. But getting a top-notch offensive lineman in return who's going to be cheap, and also having the 5th overall pick, I'm thinking that the New York Giants will get some high draft grades, as often happens when you draft twice in the top 10. But that team is just filled with excellent young talent. Wouldn't trading up for a safety be inefficient? Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It will be. If they were to do that, it would be inefficient. Right. And there is a concern that I would have about Caleb Downs playing up in the box at only about 205 pounds, and he is not built like Harrison Smith. Harrison Smith is a tank. He's like 220 pounds. So there's a difference there between him and Downs. But I also think from the Vikings inside their building, you have to be talking about it, because when we go through the blue chip players of this draft, unless there's something we don't know medically about Caleb Downs, if you go through the blue chip players in this draft, they're pretty much all gone already. And there's one guy that is left, and I'm not including Ruben Bain just because of the arm thing. Obviously, that is an issue with the NFL, and he already now is kind of the guy that drops. I don't remember what his over-under was going into this for where he was going to be picked, but I mean, the NFL does care about the arm length thing. And Ruben Bain also didn't do workouts at the combine, which I think hurt him. I think if he had put on a great workout, then it might have helped. But he didn't. So he is the guy that's dropping. And now, could the Vikings could Bain drop that far? Could the Vikings be in play for Ruben Bain? Let's take a look at the board here. Let's take a look at the board. So Miami, the Miami pick is traded to Cowboys. Their pick is in right now. So we'll see how that plays out. But even if we look a few spots down, I mean, we're only a handful of picks away, and there's a lot of talent that's on the board still. Kenyon Sadiq, Jermod McCoy, we don't know what's going to happen there. Mekhi Lemon is an interesting one that if he started to slide, would the Jets pick him up? Or could someone like Omar Cooper Jr., could there be a reach there? We don't know if a team is eyeballing someone like Peter Woods as maybe the best defensive tackle in this draft. KC Concepcion is still an interesting one. Keldrick Falk is someone who could be, overdrafted. There's a lot of talent there. And every time we ran the simulation, what I kept coming back to every single time I ran the simulation was somebody drops. And the computers, they knew somebody drops, somebody surprising. And every time it's like, oh, no way, that guy's on the board. But there would be sometimes. I mean, there almost had to be that one player would slide. Chris, do we think that teams are put off by Bain's off the field stuff? That is certainly a possibility, because one of the reports that might have slid under the radar a little bit was it's not what happened with Ruben Bain, because the charges were dropped. And look, I don't know exactly what happened, but it seemed like from the family and what they put out there that it was an accident and it was horrible and, that kind of thing, but maybe not something that you'd be concerned about happening again. But then there was another report that said that the way Bain had responded to teams' questions about it were not maybe the best. And if it felt like he was trying to hide something from his teams, that may have put them off a bit. I tend to think it's the arms. I mean, just another dude says that it might be the historically short arms. A lot of these pass rushers are built in a lab where their arms go down to their ankles and they can just get hands on guys. But if you're trying to rush off the edge in college, okay. In the NFL, it's different because most college tackles, they don't have NFL arms. That's why the tackles are in the NFL, because they're the right size and they have the right arm length. So here we go. Caleb Downs to the Dallas Cowboys. Makes sense. Makes sense for them to trade up. That's a good move for the Cowboys. I know they do some crazy stuff sometimes, but that is a really good play for them to get the best safety and probably the last true top-notch talent in this draft. Now it drops off a cliff to every guy. We're going to have some discussion like Ruben Bain. It's, can this guy stay healthy, or does this guy's shortcoming, are they going to be able to make up for it? Is he a wide receiver too? We're going to have those discussions for all the players going forward. But this is a good play from the Dallas Cowboys to get this level of talent. And now it becomes worth it. Now safety is worth it. At the top 3, safety was probably not. And once again, the safety drops lower. So if you were somebody that on FanDuel the other day, when Caleb Downs over under was 9.5, if you said, hey, all the safeties always drop, then you would have been right. And Caleb Downs ends up dropping to the Dallas Cowboys. And now the pick is in for the Miami Dolphins as we start to get closer and closer to the Minnesota Vikings selection here. And now that Downs is off the board, there's nobody that the Vikings would consider trading up for, I don't think. I think Downs would have been the one that if the Cowboys picked Ruben Bain, that maybe you call Miami and see what they want. Anthony, which players would you stick and pick if a trade was on the table? Kenyon Sadiq would be the one because he is just so different in terms of his physical abilities and his upside. I'm not sure how many other guys right now are on the board that I would say that for, because okay, there's an asterisk next to that, because if Jermod McCoy's knee is fine and that's all smoke, then take him. That guy is an awesome talent, but it's probably not all smoke. There's probably truth to all rumors, say. Who do the Vikings want, Hunter? I think Dylan Thieneman is starting to make a lot of sense. As we look at the upcoming picks, where is Dylan Thieneman going to go? And if we spend all that time talking about everybody else, it is Dylan Thieneman. That's going to be kind of funny. But let's take a look. Let's try to project it forward here. So Dallas takes Caleb Downs. Miami's on the board. I'm thinking Miami goes wide receiver. The Rams also could want wide receiver. Baltimore seems like a perfect fit for Vega Ioane. Tampa Bay is a total wild card. Jets, another receiver team. And then Detroit, offensive tackle. There is a pretty clear path to Dylan Thieneman ending up as a Minnesota Viking, looking at that next couple of picks. But also, are any of those teams taking Kenyon Sadiq? Would be another question. Because if Miami goes wide receiver here, they could also go Sadiq. The Rams, I suppose they could. They love to play tight ends, but that would be a pretty big shock. They were kind of a wide receiver team. Baltimore has been plugged in with offensive line forever here. And then Tampa Bay is totally up in the air. Maybe whoever they don't take. But do they need a safety? Probably not. Detroit, I think Detroit probably does need a safety, but they also need offensive line even more than they need a safety. So the Dylan Thieneman projection is kind of looking pretty good right now. Hawkeye, could they trade down and get Thieneman? Depends on how much they really wanted him. If you think that he is a great prospect and you don't want to take any risk, then you don't trade down. You just take him. But let's say they were just okay on Dylan Thieneman, then you have to think about trading down maybe. Richard, think we get sniped on Thieneman? Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out like who that's going to be. With the teams coming up are really big into, I think, wide receiver and weapons. Oak Dog, can Thieneman play slot corner or corner? I don't think so. I think he can be a big nickel, but I don't think he can really play slot corner. I don't think he's quite fluid and shifty enough to do that. He's much more, in my mind, he's a free safety who could come up to the box and make plays. But I would not have him in a Harrison Smith role up in the box all the time. He can move around. He did it in college. I definitely would not have him like lined up one-on-one with wide receivers. Okay, this is quite a surprise. Folks, we have our first big reach of the night. This is Caden Proctor from Alabama, the offensive tackle going to the Miami Dolphins. Goodness gracious. I mean, everybody had him with Detroit because they thought he was going to fall. And even most recently when Nick Saban said that he had a lot of trouble staying in shape when he was away from the facility, made me think, well, maybe Proctor doesn't go high. Another situation where if we go through this entire draft board, it just screams positional value. And this is why we talked about it so much going into this draft, because Arvell Reese and Sonny Styles got drafted lower than expected. Caleb Downs, the safety, way lower than expected. And now Caden Proctor gets overdrafted. Spencer Fano gets overdrafted by consensus, by most mocks. The same goes for Jordan Tyson. The same goes for Carnell Tate. Teams are drafting tackles and wide receivers. They are just throwing their draft capital there. But you're right, Hunter, that you don't think it's you don't think it's that big of a reach. No, I think it's because of the positional value. It's not. You're taking an offensive tackle who's 350 pounds. So it's not like I don't mean a crazy reach as in the prospect, the talent, the size. I only mean from the mock drafts and from the expectation that I don't know that anybody had Proctor going quite this high. Aaron, Detroit is scrambling right now. I mean, if you're Detroit, you got to be wondering, like, do you have to make a trade up potentially to get Monroe Freeling? And if all these if all these offensive tackles go, then maybe safety ends up being the best position on the board for the Vikings if the premium positions are gone. Keldrick Falk remains a wild card here. Now that we've seen one player, or actually several players that are drafted in very different spots. And already, folks, we just need to stop and say NFL draft, baby. This is why we watch, right? We try to project so many different times, so many different ways of looking at it. And then teams take players that we just didn't expect because they have different ideas and they don't tell anyone who they're taking. Ruben Bain, though, Ruben Bain is still on the board. That one is going to be interesting because if he's on the board for the Vikings, I mean, would that make sense? Could he drop that far? Ruben Bain, would he make sense for the Vikings even because he's a football player? I mean, you saw that with him playing in college. He could get after the passer. He's a dangerous player, but he is probably going to have to be in a specific spot. Not any team can just have Ruben Bain with his arm length in their system, but I don't know how much the Vikings care about that. I mean, they do have players with longer arms. Van Ginkel, I think, is okay arm-wise, and Grenard has crazy long arms, but if Bain continues to fall and he's just the best football player on the board, I don't think anybody would have any problem with the Vikings picking him. It sure would be a shock, though. I'm trying to remember if I even wrote a Ruben Bain draft profile for my draft guide, because Ruben Bain I thought was going to go much higher. Do the Rams take Thieneman? I think he is got to be in their view. I was thinking Mekhi Lemon, though, because they could use another wide receiver. Marcos, as looks like we can trade down. All depends on whether someone wants to trade up with the Vikings. The way things are falling, there's a lot of talent on the board, and I'm not sure if there's going to be a team that feels like they need to trade up, because if you think about it from a Vikings perspective and you have like 18, 19, 20, 21, where you look at everybody on the board and go, well, yeah, there's like 5 good players there. Well, other teams might think the same thing that are behind you. You know, Carolina might think the same thing when they're right behind you. The Rams, are they going to go Ty Simpson? That would be a pretty odd pick to me, unless they feel like he's their franchise quarterback to develop. But at least they'd have a good plan, which would be to develop him maybe for 2 more seasons, depending on how Matthew Stafford plays. Maybe they're sold on his character, makeup. His arm talent's pretty good. His size is underwhelming and hasn't played a lot of football. But, I mean, once upon a time, the Vikings had, a quarterback with some of those issues, and they didn't give him proper time to develop. So, I guess we'll see if that ends up being the case. Hunter says, I think there's a lot of talent, but I don't think the Vikings are eyeing wide receiver or tackle. Makes me think they want to stick and pick. Red, what's your center ranking? I think that, okay. So just in terms of the chat, if you guys want to like not spoil the picks for TV, that would be great. Just for everybody who's got the TV on and is listening to me, if you can avoid it, I know it's fun to be an NFL insider, and some NFL insiders have more fun than others, but if you kind of ruins it for the people who are watching and trying to watch this. You guys have been great about that, so I appreciate it. But in terms of center, I agree with Highboy that Logan Jones I think you have round 5. I think round 3. Jake Slaughter is one who I'm not sure I understand why Jake Slaughter hasn't gotten more attention. His athletic profile was great, and his performance in terms of his PFF grades across the board, really good. He's 6'5". He's got size. I just don't really understand why Slaughter hasn't gotten a little bit more attention for being a potential 3rd round pick. So I go back and forth because Logan Jones just flies out of his stance and hits people, and that's enjoyable to watch, and he's very strong. But Slaughter's bigger, and I think that we agree that bigger does matter after watching years of Garrett Bradbury. 3rd and nerdy, wouldn't mind taking, is it David Boston's son, Denzel Boston? Oh, the age just hurt my back and my knees, if that's true. But Denzel Boston, I really like. He's one of my favorite players in the draft. He's strong. He's got great size. He runs through tackles. He runs through defenders, and he just tracks down everything. I mean, he just has such great hands. I enjoy watching him play, and his quarterback play was awful. And so he caught everything. So I like Denzel Boston a lot. Cowherd predicted Ty Simpson to the Vikings today. I guess I understand where he'd be coming from with something like that. I think the Vikings are looking at Kyler Murray to try to become the franchise quarterback. And if it doesn't work out, then maybe they're surprised and it happens with JJ McCarthy. And if that doesn't work out, then it's draft next year, 2027. But it is in a little bit of a dicey spot. So I get where he'd be thinking like, and I've talked about this many times, you draft for a couple years down the road. You don't necessarily draft for right now. So if the Vikings did it, okay, well, I get it. But it's not something I would necessarily advise for this player. But that's kind of just my take on Ty Simpson. Is he looks like a guy that's going to need a lot of time in order to become a good quarterback. But here you go. Ty Simpson to the Los Angeles Rams. The Rams, they are doing this right, because if you're going to take Ty Simpson, you do it in a spot where he is going to be able to develop over multiple years. I don't love this for the Los Angeles Rams. For me, and if I'm Matthew Stafford tonight, I am not happy. I mean, this is not exactly like Kirk and Michael Penix, They probably told him first, I'm guessing, but I would not be happy if I were Matthew Stafford, because I would be looking at this and saying, dude, why aren't you getting something to help me right now? A Mekhi Lemon, a Dylan Thieneman, like somebody on the defensive side. They could use another defensive back, even though they've invested there. So I am very surprised that he went this high. And this is one of the biggest reaches that I can ever remember when it comes to a quarterback. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but in terms of the consensus boards had him at something like 38, and he ends up going 13. But now this right here does change the math for the Minnesota Vikings, because nobody had this. Everyone thought, okay, they traded away their other draft pick to get Trent McDuffie, so there's no way they're going quarterback. They're going to go wide receiver, maybe even offensive tackle, and then they go quarterback. And nobody projected, including me, that there would be a push now for extra talent goes down to the Vikings because of the quarterback. We all thought, well, there's one quarterback that's going to be taken, and then we'll see. Now Ty Simpson comes off the board to the Rams. They're going to have a good development plan for him. They have the best of the best, and he's going to have a chance to succeed. But I don't know, man. I don't think I would be doing anything except for giving Matthew Stafford more talent around him, even if you really like this quarterback. It's hard to question the Los Angeles Rams of Los Angeles because the scoreboard says what it says. They've won the Super Bowl. They were in the NFC Championship last year. I mean, McVay's been to another Super Bowl. They know what they're doing in LA. So if they like Ty Simpson this much, I was not in on Simpson. But if they like him this much, and he does have a lot of arm talent, and he does have high IQ, I guess Penix is probably the biggest reach. Like, a lot of people had Penix as a first-round pick, though. They just didn't have him maybe necessarily all the way up at Atlanta. Daniel Jones was one that was a late first that was picked really high. This is a pretty big shock, but now the Vikings will have a chance. We'll see. Does Ruben Bain start to fly down the board and be available for the Vikings? Could Kenyon Sadiq make it there? We're at the Ravens. The Ravens, I mean, they have obviously Kyle Hamilton, but they could go safety here if they wanted to. But gosh, I never thought that we would get to a point where Ty Simpson wasn't even on the board when the Vikings picked. I thought that we would kind of be joking around like, well, maybe Colin Cowherd's right. Like, maybe they should. But maybe also Cowherd had heard something about a team that was going to select Ty Simpson to develop him over a couple of years. But yeah, no, you're right, Jeff, that's two players so far that were very unexpected. And this is why the mockers and the insiders, nobody tells them who they're going to draft. And the Rams did a good job of keeping it very quiet. The Matt Tracker. Oh, sorry, I missed your comment there. I was just about to read it. Did the Rams think someone else would take him, or is this just the F them picks mindset? I would guess that if the Rams were this high on Ty Simpson, then probably other people were too. And there are a couple of analysts out there, Mike Renner from CBS and Dan Orlovsky. Now, those guys studied the quarterback closely. I watched Ty Simpson on some Saturdays and didn't think that he really met the right away eye test. But those guys who studied him, there were takes that people said, no, he actually is a better prospect than you think. I just think that he had more, not red flags, but concerning things of didn't play much football, half a season of good performance, isn't that big. His mobility's fine, but it's not difference making in the NFL. His arm is good. He's got a very, very live arm, but taking him there is very aggressive. Joe, would you take a cornerback with an injured knee who has 25% chance of being a top 30 corner, or a safety with 60% chance of being a top 10 free safety? I would probably go with the corner there, even if it's a little bit scary. You're talking about Jermod McCoy, and he's still going to be on the board here, maybe potentially as well. Finally, hey, look, we have a pick that everybody mocked, and that is Vega Ioane, the offensive guard from Penn State, goes to the Baltimore Ravens. We got one, folks. All the other picks have been quite a bit different than was projected in most mock drafts. But the Vikings now are getting closer to having a choice between maybe Ruben Bain, although he could go here, maybe Kenyon Sadiq, maybe Dylan Thieneman. Let's take a look at our board and see who the best players available are after Vega Ioane just went. So this is by Stick to the Model. The best players available: Ruben Bain, Mekhi Lemon, Kenyon Sadiq, Dramad McCoy, Monroe Freeling, the offensive tackle, Keldrick Falk, Dylan Thieneman, Casey Concepcion, Peter Woods, Avion Terrell, Denzel Boston, Caleb Lomu, who I'm interested in, and Omar Cooper. I don't know that Emmanuel McNeil-Warren is going tonight. Colton Hood was a late riser in the draft process, just only recently started getting talked about as a potential high draft pick. That's a lot of good players on the board that the Vikings are going to pick from. So we're only here now 4 picks away from the Vikings. Even if it goes just the top players, they might have a choice between Falk and Thieneman, or McCoy and Thieneman, or Peter Woods is even a potential here. A guy that I haven't been that high on, but there are some people who have talked him up as a potential first round draft pick. So, I mean, this is falling really nicely for the Minnesota Vikings. I think this is falling very nicely for the Vikings to maybe have their choice of take a wide receiver who's highly rated. They could also potentially trade back, because if Mekhi Lemon makes his way to where the Vikings are, then there might be a team behind them that wants to trade up for him. Highboy wants Thieneman or Woods. I'm just less high on Peter Woods. I just, there's not production there, and that is very concerning. Mekhi Lemon and Recreate 3 Deep. Sadiq is the pick for Aaron. Those guys could be on the board. Setting up for a trade down would make a lot of sense. Is Falk better than Bain? I think it's a different. They're similarly sized. Falk is bigger and has the arm length and all the tools, but he's so young. That's the thing with Keldrick Falk. He's just so young. Lemon is a wide receiver from USC who had great tape and then a weird interview. And I don't know what to make of that. I wasn't in the room, but people said he had a strange interview process, and that might have caused him to fall. I was reading the word Falk. Take Bain or Falk and then trade Grenard. That makes a lot of sense if that's what they're going to do tomorrow. Doomer, how much draft prep did the Vikings do on Bain? I'm sure they did their research on Bain, Messidor. They would have been watching a lot of that team. I mean, when you're talking about the top prospects, they're going to be prepared for those guys. They're going to be well scouted with the top players because they know there's always a possibility of somebody surprisingly dropping it. And, this also, it might not be a surprise to them. Maybe we can do a quick check-in. I don't know if Jonathan Harrison is ready for me to do this, but a quick check-in with Jonathan here on just the buzz, Jonathan. It seems like I'm also going to open a Diet Dr. Pepper here. I need one. It seems like, Jonathan, that there have been, other than Vega Ioane, some pretty darn big surprises here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Ty Simpson's the biggest one because that one felt like it came out of nowhere with the Rams. Going back to your point, they reportedly did tell him Adam Schefter was one of a number of reporters that reported it. The Rams did tell Matthew Stafford this morning that they were going to select Ty Simpson if he was available. Someone else had the stat that there's only been 3 other quarterbacks that were picked in the first round that had fewer pass attempts in their collegiate career than Ty Simpson: Kyler Murray, Anthony Richardson, and Trey Lance.
Oh, I was going to guess. Going to guess. That's okay. That is shocking, though. That is shocking. Yeah. And 2 of those are drafted. All of those are drafted higher, and all of them are athletic freaks. That's the thing that's so odd to me, Jonathan, about Ty Simpson being taken here. It must be a huge bet on the guy because it is not a bet on the physical traits. Not that they're bad. I'm not saying like he doesn't have a good arm. He has a very good arm. but he's not going to be a runner. He's going to be a pocket quarterback with a little playmaking, but they're going to be able to do it right. They're going to be able to develop him. And I guess if you love somebody, then you really love somebody and you should go for it. But that feels to me like they overdrafted him and sacrificed some opportunity to get an immediate playmaker. What in your feed are Vikings folk saying about the board? Because I think getting a second quarterback off the board, some reaches here of guys that were expected to go later, and Ruben Bain falling, I feel like this is kind of a dream scenario for the Vikings.
Yeah, with how many names are still available on the board, you've also seen the run on offensive linemen push guys back that Vikings fans clearly had their eye on throughout the draft process. I think that's the overwhelming sentiment, is that this draft board is falling very nicely for the Vikings front office to have their pick of the litter of who they want with some big names still on the board. So overwhelmingly positive right now. We'll see when that pick comes in, though.
All right. Thanks, Jonathan. We'll check in with you again shortly after the Vikings make the pick to get the reaction from Vikings fans. Also, Manny Hill expected to join us at some point as well. Jonathan producing and is our, we'll call you our insider tonight, Jonathan, even though you're just watching Twitter. Okay. So we have the pick is in for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and this is going to be Ruben Bain. So Ruben Bain falls all the way to 15. For a minute there, I thought this would kind of be amazing for Brian Flores. Like, if somebody was going to be able to do it and figure out how to use Ruben Bain correctly, it would be him. But he drops to the 15th pick, and now the Vikings are likely to have their choice. Let's go back and look at our screen here. So Bain goes, and the players, there's 2 more picks before the Vikings. It's almost locked in that these are receiver and tackle picks, at least in the mock universe it was. You have Lemon, Sadiq, Jamad McCoy, Keldrick Falk, Monroe Freeling. It feels like Detroit has to take a tackle because they are just so short on their offensive line. Could one of these teams take Dylan Thieneman? I would be very surprised if they did. But if it comes down to Sadiq and Thieneman, that's a tough decision for the Vikings, because Thieneman seems like the most clear-cut plug and play. That's your guy. Off you go, right? As where Sadiq doesn't have as easy of you're going to have to work him into a role. You're going to have to do a lot of work developing him. But if you have Sadiq, Jefferson, Addison going forward, and then you draft another receiver in the third, that's going to feel pretty good. But the Vikings options here are excellent because of Ruben Bain's fall and a couple of surprise reaches. Excellent options for the Vikings. Aaron, could Lemon fall because of the weird combine press conference? Well, it's not just the weird press conference. It's also the fact that there were reports that he also was odd inside of the actual meeting rooms, and that teams didn't really gel with him very well inside the meeting rooms. So now the Jets are on the board. And that might cause him to drop, but he's a very good prospect. I mean, if the Vikings end up with, and I'll throw Boston into this as well, Boston and Lemon both on the board, you might have to think about that. If they end up with Jamad McCoy, I guess we'll find out what the injury situation is. Rochambeau, how does he compare to Vernon Davis? Well, Vernon Davis, if I remember, it's a long time ago, but I think he was like really productive in college, which Sadiq has not quite been that, but he's only really played for 1 year. So it's a bet that he's going to get there. And with Vernon Davis, it took a few years, and that's what it probably would take with Kenyon Sadiq, as it would take a couple of years, but the potential is there to be a very similar player. It's the only other guy I can think of that is even that kind of athlete. So there is, I think, a very high upside for Kenyon Sadiq, but there's also, he might not fit the way that you expect him to fit. But it makes a lot of sense for the Vikings. It always has, because, as Richard says, replacing 2027 and third wide receiver this year, 2027 tight end, that all jives and gives them a chance to have a nice development path to eventually get to the field. So Kenyon Sadiq still on the board. Dylan Thieneman, no one has reached for him. Positional value continues to kind of crush it in this draft. that, yeah, Jeremiah Love was taken very high, but all the other players that were not considered, edge rusher, offensive tackle, they have, maybe not fallen at the spots that we expected. The offensive tackles have been reached for, and quarterback, that's another positional value thing, reached for versus the consensus. And now you end up with some of the other positions like Sadiq. And I think, Hunter, you're fair with Sadiq scaring you. He is kind of a scary prospect because we have seen that tight end not work out at times. We have seen that tight end turn into, somebody that eventually goes on to another team, like a Noah Fant or something like that has happened. So if the Vikings are going to trade Jonathan Grenard, both of the edge rushers that we've talked about could be there, Keldrick Falk and Akeem Messidor. And the Lions just seem like they're going to be a lock for picking an offensive lineman. All right, here Roger Goodell announcing the pick, and this is going to be Kenyon Sadiq. So he goes off the board to the New York Jets, and feels like the Jets have done a great job here, getting an edge rusher, a playmaker. There were some people who thought that they would not pick Kenyon Sadiq because they drafted a tight end recently, but I guess his freakish nature was just too much for the New York Jets. So now the Vikings are going to have their pick of the litter, depending on where the Detroit Lions go. Now, we've seen a lot of surprises, and Detroit has traditionally surprised everyone in the draft universe, but one of the top wide receivers is going to be there. And I really like Denzel Boston. Lemon, maybe not as much, but his route running is excellent, had great production in college. And maybe, if a guy's going to drop because of some combine interviews, but he's a great football player, then okay. I'm going to advocate right here for wide receiver because there's great wide receiver prospects on the board. Two of them in my mind. Mekhi Lemon has been ranked all the way at the top for a very long time in this draft process by the people who just watched him but didn't talk to him in a room. And his performance on the field made him, in a lot of people's minds, wide receiver 2, 3, 4 is where I saw him all the way through this draft process. So if they can get him, if that's who they want to take, then this is a great place to go at wide receiver. You get somebody to create a 3 deep right away. You get an option for the future. You get the best, you could ever ask for situation for Kyler Murray. So I'm all in on the wide receiver position. But if they want Dylan Thieneman, then the board, the mocks haven't gotten everything right, but they certainly have handed the Vikings a potential shot at Dylan Thieneman if the Detroit Lions do not go that way. So the Lions pick is in. This makes a lot of sense to be offensive line. It has been from day one. But if the Vikings are going to trade Jonathan Grenard tomorrow, if that's locked in, that they're going to trade Grenard, well, then you might want to take Keldrick Falk, or you might want to take Akeem Messidor. Those are great prospects at the right position for the Vikings to take. So options for the Vikings. Again, they couldn't have asked for this to go much better outside of had they had Kenyon Sadiq on the board. I would have been very interested to see if they would have gone with him over whoever else. But I think that positional value here, wide receiver, 2 top wide receivers are available for the Vikings, or 2 top edge rushers. I would trade down if I were the Vikings for sure. A couple of spots. I mean, if you could get Thieneman along with a draft pick in the 3rd round, I mean, that's a pretty good value. But wide receiver, setting up for the best weapons in the NFC North in a league where you got a lot of good defensive minds, you got a lot of good defensive players, but you also have really good quarterbacks and offenses that you got to score with. I mean, go score with them. But you're right. I mean, if they traded down and they took, maybe say Keldrick Falk still, and then got a 3rd rounder that turns out to be really good at wide receiver, I mean, I'm not going to complain about that. It's just Lemon is a very good prospect, and so is Boston. If they go with either one of those guys, that is the A+ for me. That's the home run. I mean, that's the one that I think could be the biggest difference maker, because always and forever, how your quarterback performs is going to be the top indicator of how much success that you have. So the options are everywhere for the Minnesota Vikings, and we'll see which way they go. If you guys could try not to spoil the pick, if you see it out there on Twitter, just, try not to do that so we can have the instant reaction from everybody. That would be awesome if you could do that, because it's coming in and I'm sure it's going to get reported out on Twitter, but let's kind of wait and see here. So the Lions on the board, their pick is in, ESPN is in commercial, and they're coming back. And it seems that some of you are already spoiling the pick anyway, so that's interesting, but I'm not going to. I'm going to wait and we'll see. But the Vikings have a lot of options here. They've got a board that has dropped very nicely to them. And everything that they could want to do is on the table. Everything that we've talked about, every potential option except for Kenyon Sadiq. And that was the one where I really wasn't sure, is Sadiq actually going to get to the Vikings? And then when he didn't do it with the Jets, that puts them in a position to potentially trade down, to potentially take receiver, to take edge rusher. Everything is an option now for the Minnesota Vikings. So the Detroit Lions on the board, and then we are one away. But this has already been a fascinating draft to get us here to this point, because there's just some things that have gone on that we didn't expect. Ruben Bain, and Caleb Downs not going where we expected them to go. So we wait now for the Detroit Lions, and then the Vikings will be on the board. And I'm going to wait to give my analysis till Roger Goodell actually makes the pick. So I know that a lot of you are spoiling it in the chat, but I'm just going to wait and analyze what the Lions do, and then we'll go from there. But this is, I guess, one of the unfortunate things about the NFL insiders breaking down everything first with the reports on Twitter and ruining it. But we wait. We'll just wait. I know, guys. If you're tweeting 100 times who it is, I see you. But I'm just going to wait. So the Lions are taking here, it is going to be Blake Miller that the Lions are taking. So Blake Miller was a guy that I looked at as a potential Viking target if they were going right tackle, because he played right tackle in college. He is a very athletic guy, but also has a ton of playing time. So Blake Miller has been playing a college football for 3 seasons, maybe even more, as a starter. So now he gets to come in for the Lions and start right away. And that means they're going to move Penei Sewell over to left tackle and have Blake Miller. Clearly the Lions were locked in at offensive tackle. They needed to go in that direction after what happened last year with their offensive line. Because once their offensive line broke down, then the Lions obviously were in a lot of trouble. So here comes the Minnesota Vikings. The pick is in, and Roger will be coming very soon to the podium to announce the way that the Vikings do. I agree with you, Third and Nerdy, that the 8-minute has really changed this. I mean, in previous seasons, I felt like it was a grind getting through to the next pick. And now picks coming off the board really quickly has gone very nicely here, because we've been able to get quick analysis and then right back to the next pick. So the Vikings selection is in. Options all over the board for them. I do wonder about the potential of trading down, because, I mean, can you really trade down in a draft where there's so much talent right behind where the Vikings are picking? I think that if you're one of the teams behind them, you're assuming that there will be some players that drop. So we will get Roger Goodell to the board here, and we'll make the pick, and then we'll get a quick, in a couple of minutes after that, a breakdown of the reaction to the pick from Jonathan Harrison. And then in a few minutes, we'll get Manny Hill as well into the mix to talk about the pick and see what he thinks. So here we go. Minnesota Vikings pick is in. And Roger Goodell announces, come on, Raj, Caleb Banks, the defensive tackle from Florida. So, guys, with the language a little bit here, if we can. They go with Caleb Banks, the defensive tackle from Florida. So I'll give you my thoughts on this right away, that Caleb Banks has one of the highest ceilings in this entire draft. He has the potential to be a freak, a Linval Joseph caliber. Like, he is that size, that level of quickness, that level of potential dominance for Caleb Banks. But there are some issues here that I've talked about over the last few months of being pretty concerned about the idea of taking Caleb Banks. And I can see from the chat already, Dan says horrible, and Timothy says at 18, though. Some of you are talking about it as a solid pick, but it is a very, very risky pick for a couple of reasons. Number one is that this is already one of the biggest reaches versus the consensus board. Daniel Jeremiah, for example, had him I think he finished in the 40s maybe, or in the 30s. Fire KOC is already out there. But, with Banks, this is much more risky than I expected for the Vikings. And also, mock drafters, sorry that your dream is dead and it is not going to be Dylan Thieneman. But this is one that I was not a huge fan of the idea of drafting Caleb Banks, because he has had multiple foot injuries, and that's really concerning. When I was watching Banks at the combine move around, I thought, this is pretty darn impressive. And then he hurt his foot again after it was something that already was injured before. So it feels to me like this is a swing for the fences that I didn't exactly have on my radar. Now, Banks was a guy that early on at the combine, initially, I thought this is someone who makes so much sense for the Vikings. But the multiple injuries, that's where you hesitate. He did not play a lot in 2024, and his production was not great. In 2025, and his production was not great in 2024. And when I did the research on all the defensive tackles over the last 10 drafts and just looked at how they performed if they didn't have great production, and the answer was not great. So it is a very risky selection that has a very wide range of potential outcomes. If Caleb Banks struggles with injury and becomes Caleb Farley, then this is a big problem for the Vikings. And once again, they're willing to go the route of a player who's been hurt. And that is a big surprise, I think, because I would have expected that one thing they might change under Rob Brzezinski would have been, don't go after guys that have such serious injury issues. And Caleb Banks is certainly one of those guys. But I need to go with the other side of this, because of course there are players that I would have liked more for them. The wide receivers, as you mentioned, even if you're going to go the injured guy, unless Jermod McCoy is totally screwed, then Jermod McCoy there. But let me give the other side of it. If Caleb Banks works out for the Vikings, let's just take a look. We've been talking positional value a lot. Defensive tackle has moved its way into the positional value Hall of Fame. It is very difficult to find defensive tackles in free agency. I think we know that from how much the Vikings paid last year to get Javon Hargrave, to get Jonathan Allen. I mean, it was a lot for two guys that were pretty washed up. So if you get a good defensive tackle, Jordan Davis just made $26 million. I mean, Jordan Davis has been okay, but that just shows you how hard it is to get that player. And I think that Jordan Davis is a good kind of comp for Caleb Banks as someone who is freakishly athletic. Now, I think Davis a better run stopper. Banks has more upside potential of getting after the passer, but in terms of like their size and athleticism, he is the one that in this entire draft falls under the absolute freak category. There are probably only 5 players in this draft, like Sonny Styles, Jeremiah Love. There's only 5 or 6 players that are freaks, that have through the roof potential, that if it clicks, they can be superstars. And Caleb Banks is one of them. So where they do check boxes in the, let's say in the Purple Insider, like you must check these boxes to be an A+ draft pick for the Minnesota Vikings in my eyes. He checks a few. It is the correct positional value. It's the correct ceiling, that if he does click and he does reach his ceiling, Caleb Banks will maul people. He's going to play against Garrett Bradbury and he's going to pick him up and he's going to throw him if it works out. The boxes that are not checked for the Purple Insider must do this to get an A+. One, could you have traded back? Because Dallas just traded with Philadelphia. So were they interested in trading with the Vikings? Could you have traded back? And that is odd. Philly and Dallas, I mean, cats and dogs, they're making a trade. Could you have traded back if you're the Vikings? I would have preferred trading back. The injury history is undeniable. It is a huge concern when you have a guy that size. Now, I'm sure what they've said many times before is our medical team is signed off on this guy. And I have no doubt that the Minnesota Vikings have a great medical team, but they're not future tellers. And they did this last year with free agents, and some worked and some didn't. They've done it in the draft before with somebody like Andrew Booth Jr. That did not work out. And it's a huge concern. If Caleb Banks ends up getting hurt and has this consistent foot issue, somebody that big with a foot problem is a major concern. And based on history, there's a few major red flags with Caleb Banks. The biggest red flag is production, that he did not have big numbers in college. He did not have great PFF grades in college. And you might say, oh, well, what do they know? But the PFF grades have been incredibly predictive when it comes to defensive tackles. Because you think about what is it you do in college as a DT that PFF couldn't see? You just destroy the other person, right? And if you can do that, like Quinnen Williams or something who graded through the roof, then your chances of working out are pretty good. Guys who have not graded well have often turned into busts at the defensive tackle position. Big red flag right there. And it's a big red flag when a team drafts against the consensus board. Arif Hassan's consensus board did not have Caleb Banks as a first-round pick. And when teams have gone so much against that through the years, their chances of a miss are much higher. So the way that I look at Caleb Banks as he's taken at 18, and I will admit, this is something that through the entire draft process, I was not for. I was not for the Vikings taking Caleb Banks through the entire draft process because of these injuries and because of the lack of production. But it's a pick to me that has the widest range of maybe any player in the entire draft of outcomes. It would not surprise me in the least if they were looking at, here are the markers for us in terms of athleticism, in terms of traits, and in terms of what Brian Flores sees and how he clicks with this player. And if we get him in our building, then he's going to turn into a monster. If he works out, there is a world where Caleb Banks is a star. And it's not that every single defensive tackle ever has had to have the exact right production in college. In fact, I think Sharif Floyd didn't have much production himself, and he turned out before his injury to be a very good player. So it does happen that guys are drafted on their upside and what they eventually could be, and they end up turning into the stars that their team drafting them sees them becoming. So with Caleb Banks, I love the upside. I am very big on the upside because I think he can be Linval Joseph, that type of level. There are just not people walking around the United States of America at 6'6" and 330 pounds who move like that. There are just not those people. So I think that what the Vikings are looking for here, and I would agree with the comment, it's not a data-driven pick. It's definitely not. But where it is data-driven would be the positional value. Because if you land a player, and I know that a lot of you in the comments are deciding right now tonight what he's going to become. Well, I don't think we could do that. But my issue is the risk. But on the side of it where they're seeing the upside is if you hit on a player like this and he becomes Chris Jones. Let's just throw a name out there for somebody who's this size, this explosiveness. Chris Jones makes $30 million a year. And Dexter Lawrence makes $28 million. And up the middle, it is the hardest possible position to deal with for an offense. We've seen this with Jalen Carter. So if you are an offense, what do you hate trying to game plan for? Linval Joseph, Jordan Davis, Jalen Carter, defensive tackles who you cannot handle. Akeem Hicks is another one. We have seen these types of defensive tackles dominate the National Football League. So I see why the Vikings would swing for it. Because if they believe that they have the right role and the right development plan for Caleb Banks, and they are okay with him medically, which they must be to take him number 18 overall, then you're swinging for the fences. So I'm very much on two sides of this because the upside and the positional value to me are home runs. I mean, this could be one of the better players and most valuable in the NFL if it all goes right at his defensive tackle position. But the risk here is so immense. And I think what surprises me the most, well, one, that there was a trade right behind the Vikings and they weren't involved. Mekhi Lemon ending up, this is kind of another L. Mekhi Lemon ending up with the Philadelphia Eagles is not good. That's not good. Because I think he's going to be very good and he's a great fit there. Akeem Hicks was a third round. I'm just talking about the guys who fit this profile. I'm not talking about when guys were drafted. Guys who fit the profile of this size, this level of dominance physically over their opponents. Caleb Banks falls under that category. And Chris Jones was a second round draft pick, but there's just not many that have that speed, that quickness. The other side of it is immensely risky, and that's what surprises me. One of the reasons I think that everybody went with Dylan Thieneman for the Vikings was probably just the fact that, I mean, he was safe, right? He was obvious. It was like, if they take Dylan Thieneman, then you plug and play and you're going to be just fine. And you know what he's going to be and you have an acting GM. You don't have a locked in general manager. So if you're talking about like a guy who is kind of trying to prove himself maybe a little bit, but really just make sure he keeps the train on the tracks, then you would not think that you were looking for somebody to swing big on, right? You would have thought that, all right, you're going to take the safe pick. Throughout this entire offseason, the Vikings did the safe thing. They didn't restructure too many contracts. They brought back the players that they were expected to bring back. They signed one defensive back, and they just kind of kept the train moving. So my expectation going into this draft was that that's what they would do, that they would just get, maybe it was the safety or maybe it's a wide receiver to, give KOC another weapon and Kyler Murray another weapon. I did not expect them to show up at the plate like Jose Canseco swinging out of their shoes for Caleb Banks. So, I'm seeing a lot of very definitive type of stuff. And for me, I always know that, hey, look, the wide receiver one every single year in the first round is not always going to be something that the Vikings do. They've done it a couple times, but they're not always going to do it. I still think that they'll do it in the third round or maybe even the second round. So you'll get a wide receiver, and I think you'll get a good prospect. Keldrick Falk made a lot of sense to me. Akeem Messidor made a lot of sense for me as guys. Even Falk was a little more on the risky side, but he's so young and, potentially could develop over the coming years. The guy with the big injury history is probably one of the scariest picks that you can make. So, no, I don't think that Rob needs to be put in a spaceship and sent to the sun, but I'm just surprised that him being the guy who's operating it would go in that direction. And, when he was talking about, the sort of thing of, well, what's the guy's path to the field? Here's another part. And I do disagree that it's not a sexy pick. I think DT is a sexy pick because these players, if they click, are so valuable and so dominant. And who knows this better than Minnesota Vikings fans, right? Like, Vikings fans are well aware that the defensive tackle position is great for, back to Henry Thomas or John Randall or, whatever, Kevin Williams, Pat Williams. This is a place that loves itself a good defensive tackle. And Linval Joseph, I mentioned, Sheldon Richardson for a year there in 2018. I mean, yeah, this place knows DT. Harrison Phillips was tremendously popular here. So if Caleb Banks clicks, I mean, yeah, like, he's going to be immensely popular, and it is a sexy pick because it's a guy that can, when you go and watch the highlight reel is preposterous. The way that he moves, when he gets to the backfield, you're going to say, dude, that looks like what Pat Williams used to do, only a little faster, or it looks, although he was really quick, it looks like Linval just throwing people. But the risk, there's just several different things that are risky that I would have thought Caleb Banks would drop. And I was talking about yesterday, hey man, he might get to number 49. And if he's at 49, then yes, the Vikings should definitely take him. But I didn't expect him to quite go at 18. And it kind of, it goes back to the beginning of the draft process where Banks was considered a high prospect, but then as it went along, there was the concerns about the injuries. And I think that he is going to still need recovery time before he even gets onto the field. And that is another one of those red flags. And I think it is fair, Purple Faithful, to trust Brian Flores, but Brian Flores also is not, perfect by any means, because no one knows what's going to happen when it comes to Caleb Banks' injury history. Does drafting Banks mean Harry returns? I don't know that they're connected. I never made a connection between Harrison Smith's status in this draft. A lot of people did. I did not. That's why I didn't think they'd take Thieneman. So I guess I get a W and L for my predictions throughout the draft process, of a W for it wasn't Thieneman, but an L for it was a guy that I had much more as a second round pick. And, I think that someone like Caden McDonald would have been a lot safer, but was never a fit for me. I think that Brian Flores does want a guy that can get to the backfield, that can create penetration, that has quickness, that has the size to go along with it to dominate the run game, but also get into the backfield like a player like Akeem Hicks or Chris Jones. So there isn't, I think that you're right, Marco, saying it's not about being definitive. Although, people saying like, never let Rob near a draft again or whatever. Okay, that is being pretty definitive. But, I think that if you're saying you're not a fan of the pick or you're very concerned about the pick, that is fair. That is fair, because the amount of red flags that are there for Caleb Banks, and we don't have his medical stuff. Of course, I'll, acknowledge that we don't have his medical stuff, but we do have a sense for what has happened to a lot of players that have had injury histories in the past. I want to take a second here to go and take a look at where we're at with just the draft board in general, as Messidor goes off the board to the Chargers. So let's take a look at the big board here. After the Vikings picked Caleb Banks, Monroe Freeling went to Carolina. Then Mekhi Lemon The trade up for Philadelphia goes to the Eagles, and the offensive tackle from who I didn't learn his name from Arizona State goes to the Steelers, and then Akeem Messidor to the San Diego Chargers, formerly. It's a very interesting pick that I can't say that I really expected, and I guess expecting the unexpected was probably the right thing for this draft with just the way it went for a lot of different teams. But before I get Manny Hill in here, I would say what we're going to have to do with Caleb Banks is probably be patient, because he missed last year, and the last time he really played a full season was 2024. He's not going to get an off season here. And patience is not something that Vikings fans have enjoyed very much when they evaluate draft prospects. We have certainly learned that from the way that people responded to Dallas Turner. And this one in particular is going to take time to see how it plays out. First, it's going to start with, can he get on the field right away? Is he going to be 100% for training camp? And then the next step is, well, how far along is he from a technical perspective? For somebody who didn't play a lot in 2024, is he ready to get on the field, or is he going to be a sort of a smaller rotational player, but a defensive tackle? Now, this is another box I didn't mention enough. The need was enormous at defensive tackle. It wasn't just kind of a need. It's humongous. They just don't have anything there that's proven. Still don't after Caleb Banks, but looking to build with Redmond and Banks into the future. I see the vision, but I also see why the reaction is what it is. Speaking of which, before we get Manny Hill in here, Jonathan Harrison has been monitoring moves and reaction. Jonathan, the chat has been using some words I don't love to be on the screen. It's a family program.
Yeah.
What is social media been saying?
The buzz around social media obviously kind of mimics the chat from the fans. Fans are not happy. You see some reports coming out. Jordan Schultz saying that there was a ton of late love for Caleb Banks once he got the foot fully cleared. Adam Schefter reporting that NFL teams received a letter earlier this week stating that after a scan on Tuesday, Banks is on pace to be fully cleared for football activities in early June as he recovers from that foot injury. So he should be available by June, according to that report. Seth Walder says Caleb Banks at 18, a little bit of a surprise draft day predictor, gave him just an 18% chance to be selected in the first round at all entering the night. Kevin O'Connell talking to KFAN, their draft party, saying we feel very confident that we selected a top 10 talent. Also adding, we think he can play all three spots. He can be an impactful in the sub packages. So the Vikings obviously very happy with their pick. Reporting coming in. Also want to add Alec Lewis, friend of the show, said he had one person who worked at Florida over the past year saying Caleb Banks was a unicorn. He hasn't put it all together, but if he does, ... could be a huge get for the Vikings.
Okay. Thank you, Jonathan, for that. And with that, we're going to bring in Manny Hill, if I can operate this correctly. And I did. Okay. Manny, good evening. So the way that I've laid this out, Mr. Hill, is that Caleb Banks, I see the reaction. I see what people are saying. And I am part of the problem, because leading up to the draft, we had a lot of discussions about Caleb Banks on the show with Chris Trapasso, who actually is a big fan of Banks. But he had the similar concerns. And when you see a player, like now that we have consensus boards and consensus data and all those things, when you see a player that is drafted this high, but the mock draft universe was not high on him as a first round draft pick, that's one where you have to hesitate and you have to wonder, did they reach on Caleb Banks? But also, we didn't have that medical information that Jonathan just shared. And I appreciate Jonathan bringing that in, that, you know, the scan on his foot was good, but it still raises some concerns about where he's going to go. So what is your reaction, Manny, to the Vikings sticking and picking and selecting a guy who probably has one of the highest ceilings in the entire draft and one of the lowest floors?
Well, you have to love the upside. I mean, a guy 6'6", 330, and, you know, with long arms, and, you know, when he's on, the quickness is there, the explosiveness off the line is there. I mean, he has all the potential to be just an absolute menace from the interior of the defensive line. But the thing of it is, with the way the league has gone today, if you tell me this guy's 6'6", he's 330, he's got long arms, he's explosive off the line, he has a chance to be a monster defensive tackle, you're thinking that guy's going to go in the top 5 typically. Right. And the fact that he has dropped to 18, obviously there's injury concerns. Maybe concerns with, technique and, the fundamental stuff and consistency and things like that. You do have to wonder, like, is this, when you're the Vikings and you're really thirsty for young talent, is this the right play? I mean, obviously, as you've talked about, the upside is immense. And if he hits that upside, oh boy, him and Redmond on the defensive line sharing that space is going to be incredible. But if the injury becomes a lingering thing and you just never really get what you're looking for out of him, then you're going to look at this as a real missed opportunity. And you look at some of the other guys that were taken, Messidor going to the Chargers. Malachi Lawrence going to Dallas at 23. These are guys that are defensive linemen that have been pretty productive and figure to step in right away and have a bit of an impact. So, I heard you mention, you're going to have to be patient with Caleb Banks, and that's just, I mean, we had to be patient with Dallas Turner a little bit in 2024, yep. Right? I mean, we didn't really see a lot from him early on, and then he kind of came along as a rookie, and then last year, second half of the year, he really blew up. And so I think that's what you're kind of hoping for with Caleb Banks, and you kind of see what happens. But it's risky, man, because it, like you said, it's kind of a boom or bust type of situation. If he hits this ceiling, oh boy, let's play, let's go. But if it doesn't, it could potentially be a disaster.
So Dane Brugler had Caleb Banks as DT4. And he ends up DT1. And I'm going to read you what Dane Brugler had to say in his The Beast on The Athletic with 600 pages of draft analysis. He said, Banks has a rare combination of size, raw power, and big man twitch, all of which lead to big-time flashes and glimpses of his ceiling. However, the absence of a healthy senior season complicates his projection, and his draft grade will depend on each team's appetite for risk. I think that is perfectly framed from Dane Brugler, that if you wanted to draft a Caden McDonald and have him stand in there and take up 2 gaps and just stuff bodies or whatever, you could do that. And he was probably going to hit that ceiling pretty easily. With Caleb Banks, he could be a guy that we barely ever see and go, what happened to the guy that they drafted 18? Or he could be a guy where we go, oh my gosh, he is unstoppable. And this is your Akeem Hicks. This is your Kenny Clark. This is your Chris Jones. This is your Dexter Lawrence, because those guys I just mentioned are the only people I can think of who have this size and quickness. The issue that I have is that in 2024, he played a full season, and I'll pull up his data here, but it was not impressive in terms of his performance in 2024. And the reason I'm having to scroll down is because I was looking at the consensus board, and he dropped pretty far on the consensus boards throughout the draft process. So in 2024, he had 21 quarterback hurries. This is PFF counts half sacks as full sacks, 4 QB hits and 4 sacks. So that's only 29 pressures in 12 games. That's not a high number. And his pass rush grade was 64.2. That was in 2025. That's not a great number. His pass rush win rate was 8.3%, which is not a great number. It's okay. For a guy of this size, you would just expect him to run through people in college. And it's always been one of those obvious kind of things of, if you didn't run through people in college, then why are you going to do it in the NFL? And what they must see is the top plays from Caleb Banks line up with anybody's top plays in the entire draft. It's just that there's a lot of other ones where he's eliminated pretty quickly. And that's why I am surprised by this. I would like to know, Manny, your level of surprise, because I would say mine is like a 7 out of 10. I mean, you mentioned there's all these rumors out there that they're going to trade Jonathan Grenard, but Messidor is right there. Lawrence is right there. Those are two guys that would make so much sense for the edge rusher position. And Brzezinski talked about, this is funny because he kind of did exactly what he talked about not necessarily doing, which is talking yourself into the glass is half full because you need the position. And they need the position, defensive tackle, badly. Yeah. DJ Reader is off free agency. There is nobody who can really come help you. And they're looking 100% at the glass half full side of this. Because if you look at the glass not as full, it's like quite bad. And that's where I was pretty shocked by, because I would have expected much more of a down the fairway type of pick, or a, hey, KOC wants to get his weapon for Kyler Murray type of pick, than I expected the, here's Mark McGuire at the plate, here's Kent Herbeck trying to hit a grand slam, swinging out of his shoes. I guess that I just did not totally expect. And I got a message from just now, Jeremiah Searles, who's like, I don't know, man. So I don't know, man. What was your surprise level?
Yeah, I was pretty surprised. I honestly thought they were going to go Dylan Thieneman and just play it safe, because that's kind of what a lot of people had them doing in that spot. I was kind of looking at the corners, my guy Jermod McCoy from Tennessee, Avion Terrell was another one that I was kind of looking at maybe. The other thing I kind of wonder is if they, and I think you might have even mentioned this, is if they could have traded back a few spots and still been able to do this, and you get an extra pick in the middle rounds maybe to kind of work with. I'm just really, really surprised that this is the route that they go. I mean, you should never really be completely surprised by anything you see in the NFL draft these days, but this was kind of surprising to me. I would say on a 1 to 10 scale, I'm probably where you are, about a 7, 8 in terms of level of shock. I didn't really think that this was going to be a route that they were going to go when, Rob Brzezinski is kind of in this role. We don't know if he's going to have this role beyond, June or whenever they're going to, make a decision on who the GM is going to be. So you were kind of thinking like, maybe you just play it safe here and not really take a big swing on a boom or bust type of player, but this is the route they go. And you also have to wonder, okay, maybe this was a situation where Brian Flores looked at Caleb Banks and looked at enough tape of him and said, I can do some things with this guy. I can get him. If there's questions about consistency and production, I can get this guy to be productive if we can just get him healthy. So I think that needs to be taken into consideration too. I think before we just kind of go with these grandiose, Brzezinski, why do they allow Brzezinski to make this pick? Well, I got to think that Brian Flores and even Kevin O'Connell may have had a word in on this as well. So I think you just have to hope for the best and hope that he's healthy. And like I said, if he gets to the level that he has the potential to get to, this is going to be a pretty monstrous defense.
So Casey Concepcion goes to the Cleveland Browns at 24. There's another wide receiver off the board still available is Denzel Boston. Him and Omar Cooper are the last two projected first rounders. Keldrick Falk is not gone yet. And that was somebody I was very curious how the league looked at. Once again, Manny, though, with Dylan Thieneman, safeties are just a lie. They're just a lie. They are literally a media creation. Emmanuel McNeil-Warren, Dylan Thieneman, Caleb Downs. This is the best safety class. These guys are going at number 2 overall, number 18 overall, and number, whatever. Some people had top 15 for McNeil-Warren. The NFL does not care about your safeties. They truly don't when it comes to the draft. It never, ever pays off when it comes to the draft bets on the safety position. It's actually kind of remarkable.
Even the greatest safeties of all time were not really drafted that high. Ed Reed wasn't drafted super high. Troy Polamalu wasn't drafted like super, super high. They were higher picks, but it's not like they were, people early on in the draft process, some people had Caleb Downs going in the top 5, and he goes to, what did he go, 12 to,
12, yeah.
or 11 to the Cowboys? And it's,
They traded up,
I mean,
from 12.
yeah, they traded up to get him. But, and I mean, if you think about it though, like Caleb Downs is totally like a Cowboys Jerry Jones pick. He is a big name, good, very good player at Ohio State. I don't think there's any doubting of his ability, but you know, he's kind of one of the star players of this draft, one of the most well-known players of the draft. And it's like, of course, Jerry Jones is going to take, you know, a well-known star type of superstar, you know, type of player in the draft. So, but yeah, I mean, it's hard to really tell, you know, when you take a safety, it's hard to really tell if he's going to be like a great type of, I mean, Harrison Smith, we're wondering about Harrison Smith's future and everything. Harrison Smith was end of the first round when he was drafted. So it's not like, you know, and he's one of the great safeties of all time. And so it's not a position that teams value, you know, in that top 5, top 10 range of the draft. And so it's a lot of times those guys, they get drafted a little lower, and then if they're great, they kind of emerge and they surprise people. But yeah, so I'm not. I thought Thieneman would be the pick for the Vikings because it just felt like a safe pick that Rob Brzezinski would want to make. But you're seeing that it's not a position that teams typically want to use a high draft pick on.
I just went oof a little when I saw the Texans trade up with Buffalo, and they gave up a second round pick or early third, maybe it was 60 something. And I was thinking, oh, if the Vikings had traded back like 4 spots and taken Messidor and got an extra pick, I probably would have liked that. But, you know, when we talk about the positional value, though, certainly positional value is something that the mock drafters and the big board makers don't care enough about, because it would look almost silly if they made their big board where it was like, here's all the edge rushers, receivers, offensive tackles, and that's my whole draft. And yet that's the whole draft. Even Sonny Styles, who was the best linebacker, of Fred Warner, like built in a lab type player, and even he dropped a couple more spots than people expected him to. This draft, a quarterback was massively overdrafted versus the expectation. So this draft has really screamed the NFL is only caring about, I mean, look, Mansour Delane went super, super high. Carnell Tate went higher than anybody expected. The Arizona Cardinals, you know, they're the Cardinals. So they take a running back in Jeremiah Love, which is probably not a good pick for them because I don't know when he's going to be a difference maker. 3 years from now? But with the rest of the sane National Football League took premium positions, and there is a point to be made about Caleb Banks and the premium position discussion, because years ago, it would not have been in the conversation with defensive tackle, because years ago, we know this, there was, you know, sure, the Pat Williams, Kevin Williams is an exceptional guy, but there weren't that many pass rushers, and there definitely weren't too many guys who were this size who also rushed the passer. So that wasn't talked about a lot. And now that we've seen offenses get smaller, more athletic, more outside zone, there has been a swing to where you have the monster DTs are worth their weight in gold, as the Bears just took Dylan Thieneman. So 2 times a year, I'm sorry, everyone, I'm going to say former Viking Dylan Thieneman revenge game against the Vikings. It's going to be obnoxious, but I'm sorry in advance. I will be doing that. So Thieneman ends up with Chicago, and that's a great pick for them. It just is. They needed a safety, and they got the second best one in the draft, a guy who is versatile and a playmaker, and now the Vikings will have to play against him. At 25, that's a pretty good pick. I was for a trade down and Thieneman combination. But back to the defensive tackle thing. Guards became more mobile, more athletic, centers under 300 pounds. And the guys who had the ability and the quickness to get into the backfield at that size, like Caleb Banks has, they started demolishing the National Football League. And I also think that those guys used to be offensive linemen, and now they were like, screw that, I'm going to go get quarterbacks. And those great athletes moved over to that side of the football. Defensive tackles price tags have been going up, 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 as we saw last year, the Vikings giving Jonathan Allen $20 million a year because they had to. This is the only way to get a pass rushing DT. So the Vikings nailed positional value. It's just that they had to reach versus expectation a ton to get it. And I think that we would all agree that a small reach for positional value is fine, but an enormous reach versus the consensus is just very, very risky. So it's not often, Manny, in recent years, maybe you could think of this, where we've had kind of an explosion of unhappiness with a draft pick. I mean, I think that there was the JJ McCarthy. I think that it was probably 50-50. People were on board. People were concerned, but I don't think anyone really wanted Bo Nix that much in that draft. I don't remember too many people saying I tattooed Bo Nix's name on my forearm. Like I think people were quite down on him as the pick. So yeah, okay. All right. You got, JJ McCarthy, and that's always going to be a debate at quarterback. But I don't remember much discussion about Donovan Jackson last year. Just kind of made too much sense. I don't remember too much debate about Jordan Addison. Hey, it's a wide receiver. Maybe this show's propaganda was just covering up for any criticism of the receiver position. But this one, I think, is going to have a lot of people going, why didn't you move down? Why didn't you take Mekhi Lemon? And here's the other thing too, Manny. Knowing that there are some concerns about Addison, knowing that they have nothing at wide receiver 3 presently, Lemon is on the board, and then a great organization takes him 2 picks later.
Yeah.
Like you sort of go, okay, are you sure that you're not going to take the top 10 projected wide receiver that dropped down the board? I think if there's one criticism that Purple Insider deserves to own, it's the maybe you should have just picked Mekhi Lemon.
Yeah, I mean, Howie Roseman just does it again, man. I just, it's like, it's a perfect pick for them because it's looking like they're going to trade AJ Brown probably to the Patriots in June. And you're moving on from him, and you're saving a little bit on cap money, and now you're bringing in a young, cheap wide receiver who I'm with you. I think Mekhi Lemon's going to be really, really, really good. And you just the rich kind of gets richer, and so yeah, that's what I was kind of thinking of. Like I said before, I was thinking they were going to take Thieneman. Personally, I wanted them to go corner because I don't think you can ever have enough corners. I was in shock that they took Banks. I would have really liked if they would have taken Lemon too. I would not have hated that at all. Just because, the kind of the uncertain future of Jordan Addison. But now, I think because you pass on Mekhi Lemon, now you really need Jordan Addison to get it in gear in 2026. Because if it's another year where, there's off the field stuff again, and, he's just not very productive for whatever reason, he doesn't click with Kyler Murray. That's going to be a huge detriment to this team being able to have success. They need Jordan Addison to really step it up and go back to the Jordan Addison that we saw in 2023 as a rookie that had almost 1,000 yards and 70 plus catches.
Well, let me make one quick point, and then I'll ask you one more question, Manny. I appreciate you giving some time on your draft evening here. Do want to make the point that the Vikings have other picks. And in recent years, that has just not been true. So it's like, I guess we obsess over one guy. In this particular draft, they will pick someone tomorrow in the second round. And maybe part of their projection, and we will see tomorrow, but maybe part of their projection is, look, we're going to take the big swing on day one because top 10 talents are the guys who make the Hall of Fame. And there also was Christian Darrisaw had injury issues. People weren't sure if he was tough enough or whatever. Christian Darrisaw also had insane production in terms of like never allowing a sack or something in college. So was a little different from that way. But when you look at Darrisaw, why is he so good? It starts with the physique. You just don't find guys like that. That's why you take him. And he wasn't a top 10 pick. So they're looking at it, maybe the defensive kind of version for that. And then day two, maybe you address corner with somebody safer, Chris Johnson. Also, it should be noted, because I love corner. As an idea, I mocked a bunch of corners. Colton Hood hasn't gone. We have not seen Jermod McCoy. We have not seen Avion Terrell. We have not seen Chris Johnson. So all the guys who were top corners have slid down the board, where, again, with the NFL kind of saying, even though it's a premium position, if you're not a freak, we're not going to look at you in the top of the draft. We're just not. We're not going to spend those picks, because the crazy thing about the cornerback position is that the guys who are the best of the best, you're only getting them at the top of drafts. Good luck finding them anywhere else. Not too many Richard Shermans out there. But the second wave level caliber player, the Byron Murphy, those guys do end up in free agency pretty often. So you got to be sure that you're taking someone who's going to be a difference maker. My point is, this could allow the Vikings for a safe cornerback pick like Chris Johnson, Avion Terrell in the second round, where you go, all right, well, we thought about that guy in the first round, or Colton Hood, I think, is a great second round type of prospect. That's lining up to be in good shape. The wide receiver position is lining up to be in good shape for tomorrow, where maybe if Denzel Boston doesn't get taken, but there's a number of other receivers for day 2 and day 3. There's some edge rushers for day 2 and day 3. Zion Young, I really like as a power rusher. So the board is going to look good because they actually have a second round pick. But I want to know before you, right. I know, right? But there will be, by the end of the night, we are getting close to the end of the first round here. By the end of the night, as Caden Rutledge just went off the board, there's another pretty big reach, I think, for Houston. Maybe they're trying to rebuild with some grit and power with Ed Ingram and now Caden Rutledge. But the fact that there's been other reaches in the draft has pushed some guys into the second round. So it's not over with the Vikings draft with one big swing, and you're going to have other opportunities to get starters tomorrow. Here's what I want to know from you. And I was just checking on FanDuel what some of the early expectations are. And Jordan Love to have the top regular season rushing yards over 1,000 yards is minus 114 on FanDuel. What do you expect from Jordan Love? I mean, I just don't even know what to do.
Jeremiah Love.
I'm sorry. Why? Jeremiah Love. I've said Jordan Love so many times in my life.
I think Jordan Love will be pretty good again for the Packers.
Yeah, he'll go over 1,000 yards, I think. Probably 4 times over. And so I'm curious what you thought of them doing that and what his outlook is. I'm also just curious about the rest of the first round and how, your one big thing that as you were sitting there watching it play out, you were like, oh, because I got to be honest. I thought Jeremiah Love going to the Cardinals was total BS. I just thought there's no way they're trying to leak it out there to get somebody to trade up, but that's not what happened. So give me your kind of your overarching big thing of the first round.
Yeah, I did not think, I'm with you. I did not think the Cardinals were going to take Jeremiah Love that high. I mean, you take a running back and look, Jeremiah Love was great at Notre Dame. He's the runner up for the Heisman, right? And he was outstanding. But if you're going to take a running back that high in today's NFL, he better be special. I mean, we're talking Barry Sanders, Adrian Peterson, Walter Payton type of special. Otherwise, good solid running back, you can get those guys at almost any point in the draft. So the Cardinals better be really sure that this guy is going to be a special running back. I liked what Tennessee did taking Carnell Tate. It might have been a little high, but
yes, 100%.
A little high, but 100%. I really like that. You're trying to get your young quarterback some weapons so that he can kind of grow and develop. And, obviously they have a new coach there and everything too, but I like Carnell Tate. He was kind of thought of as the second guy to Jeremiah Smith at Ohio State. Smith was the big star, and Tate was just kind of the second guy, but was very productive for the Buckeyes for a couple of years. So I like that pick for Tennessee there. How about Kansas City moving up to take Mansour Delane?
Yeah.
And that was, to try and replace, they lost 2 quarters. They traded away McDuffie and then they lost a guy in free agency too. So good on Kansas City for being a little aggressive and going up and getting him. I also like what the Saints did, getting Jordan Tyson, getting another weapon for Tyler Shuck too, to go there. So I thought the teams in the top 10, I thought did pretty good. I'm still, a little iffy on what Arizona did, taking Jeremiah Love that high, but I thought most of the teams in the top 10 did what they did made a lot of sense. I think even Cleveland, Cleveland could use some weapons on offense, but I think, getting Spencer Fano to try and just help that offensive line that has really kind of fallen apart. A line that was really good when Baker Mayfield was there, but really over the last handful of years has really kind of fallen apart. So getting an offensive tackle there to help that line for Shedeur Sanders, I guess.
Yeah.
Still have that little issue of quarterback going on there in Cleveland, but
now,
I think,
though, Manny, now that the Rams took Ty Simpson, doesn't Cleveland look kind of silly? Because if he was, I don't love him as a first round draft pick, but Sean McVay presumably knows more than I do. If that organization looked at that quarterback and said first round, but the Browns organization looked at him and said, no, we can't do that after trading back and getting additional capital, and they had another first round pick to take a receiver. It's kind of like I like to follow on Twitter. This is like the thing I do. I go watch all the clips from Cleveland Sports Radio all the time, and it is insane. It is like last year I have a friend there, Ken Carmen, and I follow him and watch all the clips. It was a circus. I can't imagine now that a quarterback went right after them, what that zoo is going to be like in Cleveland. I think the biggest surprise to me was probably Bain falling as far as he did. I thought that, teams would just go, oh, whatever, man. Like, you just go for the guy that has the talent and screw it, right? So anyway, we'll get to the rest of the draft board, how it's fallen since we've been talking. But give me one summation of your feeling. I know we've discussed it quite a bit. Then we'll get back to your comments and the board and stuff. But summation of a feeling about the Vikings handling of the first round of the 2026 NFL draft.
It's definitely a swing for the fences. There's no question about that. And if it works, it's a grand slam. If it doesn't work, if Caleb Banks is dealing with injuries and he's just inconsistent and doesn't really, develop as a talent, it's a swing and a miss, and it's a strikeout. And those are not good. I don't care what the analytics people say in baseball. Strikeouts are not good.
Yeah.
They do matter.
Yeah.
I like putting the ball in play. And obviously, Dylan Thieneman would have been, maybe a double to the left center field gap instead of swinging for the fences. So I am intrigued by the upside, obviously, of Caleb Banks. And I think, again, if he hits, he's going to be a monster, and it's going to be unbelievable and a lot of fun to watch. But it's a big risk. We'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, I think that my concern with it is that Caleb Banks will work out in 3 years.
Yeah.
And because we saw this from JJ McCarthy. When you miss a whole year, it's hard for anybody, even guys who play at the top level. And I know it's not quarterback. It's a little different than that. And you can work him into a role right away. But and here's another thing we know. And this is what I could see. I could totally see Brian Flores saying, I wouldn't be surprised if he sees a little bit of Cam Hayward. It's like, that's the Cam Hayward skill set. And I don't know what Caleb Banks' personality is. They know a lot more about Caleb Banks and his personality. So if they sit down with him and they like the IQ and they like the vibe that they get from him and they see Cam Hayward, but here's the thing about Cam Hayward. He's been a Hall of Fame caliber player for like the last 10 years, but he was not when he first came into the league. And Brian Flores has said this about Dallas Turner. He has said, I am not afraid to develop a player over several seasons. And that's what they might do here, which might mean a lot of you and I Thursday nights in November talking about how Caleb Banks only has played 18% of the snaps and people saying, what the hell is going on? Is this guy our latest bust? And then in 2028, the guy is in the Pro Bowl. I could see kind of a path for that with Caleb Banks. So that's what makes this one a little bit hard, actually super hard to evaluate. But we'll just create a lot of discussion from the chat. That's for sure. So Manny Hill, thank you so much, my friend, for stopping in. I appreciate it. And you and I will talk again very soon. So thanks for doing this.
You got it. Football. See you guys.
Manny Hill. All right, let's take a look at the board. Then we'll get back to your comments. And here's the challenge. Comment section. I've got time for you. I've got space for you. But here's what I need. I need rational comments. That's what I need. So give me your best rational Caleb Banks Vikings take in the comments, and I will get to them in just a moment, okay? Because there was some not so rational reactions right after it happened. Let's take a look at the board, though, what's happened since the Vikings pick. Just most recently, guys we talked about a lot. Akeem Mesidor went to the Chargers. Malachi Lawrence to the Dallas Cowboys. Casey Concepcion, wide receiver, to the Cleveland Browns. Dylan Thieneman picked up by the Chicago Bears. They were always going to get a safety because their secondary was decimated. Now the Vikings will play against Thieneman twice a year, which could be quite a challenge. Very talented player. And I think at 25, that positional value thing goes a little more out the board. We're seeing a lot of trades at the end of the first round here. The Jets traded up just now. So we've had a lot of different moves, but the Texans traded up to get Kalen Rutledge guard, which is a big reach there. Chris Johnson, the corner, I talked about him a lot from San Diego State. He goes to Miami. And then Caleb Lomu, a trade up for the New England Patriots, ends up at number 28. And the Patriots have their head coach for today, not for day 3, though, I guess. So we got the Jets moving back. San Francisco is moving up to number 30 is what's happening right now. There's all sorts of movement. In fact, maybe I can bring in Jonathan Harrison here to tell me what's going on with some of the movement. Jonathan, if you're ready for that, hold on one second. I'll get you in here. Lots of trading while Manny and I were talking. So I'll
get you some of those trades in a little bit. Let's see. The Jets traded up to San Francisco, spot at number 30. San Francisco's traded back a couple times now in the latter portion of the first round here. They're getting New York Jets is 33rd and 179. So New York can move up to 30. Elsewhere, got some KOC reaction for you in another draft story. I'll start with the draft story, though, because this one I heard from Ian Rappaport on NFL Network, and it is a little bit wild concerning that 20th and 21st pick. So we know that the Eagles traded up to 20.
Yeah.
At the time, though, before that happened, the Steelers were on the phone getting ready to pick Mekhi Lemon at 2021. And they were on the phone talking with him while the Eagles pulled off that trade. The Eagles were trying to get a hold of Lemon, and they couldn't because he was on the phone with the Steelers.
Oh, my gosh.
The Eagles end up picking him. They jumped their in-state rivals to get Lemon at 20, and then the Steelers had to go draft an offensive lineman instead after previously talking to Lemon. The KOC reaction held his press conference saying at that position, his size, his movement skills, his violence, the type of game that we think he can play, snap in and snap out, is something that we're really excited about. Kevin O'Connell says he expects Caleb Banks available during the 2026 season and adds, quote, as we work toward the end of the offseason program, our hope is that we'll be able to prepare him in training camp for the regular season and have him in for that. More from Kevin O'Connell. The flashes of high-end talent are clearly there. Any young player, sometimes consistency can be a thing, specifically if they're working through doing those things, not at 100%. If he has those flashes for 13, 14, 15 plus games last year, if he was a little bit more consistent, I think we would have had to call his name a little bit earlier than that. And then Brzezinski talking about his foot and the work that they did on scouting that and figuring out their concerns. We have the best doctors in the country, if not the world. We have complete confidence in them. There's nothing without risking any player you select, but we feel very good about where Caleb will be when it's time to go to training camp, so we're comfortable with the injury.
It's not so much that I think his foot will never heal. It's that the projection forward of having multiple injuries, one at the combine, one during the season, and then when you're talking about consistency being affected by injury, do you remember how good of a prospect Andrew Booth was? Like, Andrew Booth was a top 15 prospect, and it was the same conversation. It was the same, hey man, we would not have been able to get this guy if he wasn't injured. It's like, yeah, well, there's a reason for that, right? There's a reason why Daniel Jeremiah did not have this guy as a first round pick. Dane Brugler had him as DT4. Like a lot of the analysts, and they don't have the medicals, and the Vikings do. But I also feel like it's gotten borderline obnoxious, like a little bit arrogant to think that your medical group, which I have no doubt is as good as it gets, but they are not magic. And sometimes it's treated like they are. Like, we'll just bring back Aaron Jones again because we'll have the perfect plan for him and he'll never, ever get hurt. And it's like, that's not how this works. And I feel like the same thing went for Andrew Booth Jr., where I remember with Andrew Booth Jr., Kwesi Adofo-Mensah saying that he said to the medical staff, really? Like, that was like, he said, are you sure? I think it was, are you sure? Like, are you really sure? And they were like, yeah. And Booth actually didn't have the biggest injury issues, but what slowed him down was having all those injuries made him a worse player, like getting consistent, getting on the field, being able to practice all the time. It's hard to get better when you're hurt. And him missing that entire season last year, basically, he wasn't able to get better while that's happening. So now he starts from a farther position back than most defensive tackles would from a progression standpoint. That would be the concern that I have about Caleb Banks. And when I hear them say this, like, we got the best doctors, I don't dispute it. All the players, they love this medical staff. They believe in them, but it's like predicting the weather. It's like looking at the radar and going, in my opinion, based on the radar, it looks like it's going to rain. That does not mean it's going to rain. It only means there's a certain percentage it's going to rain. And it doesn't mean a guy's not going to hurt his foot again, because at this size, there's just a lot of strain on the body. So I think that the injury concerns are fair. And when it's just a little bit hard, Jonathan, when you walk up to the podium and say, the guy we draft is not consistent. It's like, okay, it's harder in the NFL, right?
Right. Yeah. As you said, the PFF's pretty good at projecting defensive tackles. And we've seen, as you mentioned, consistency. And you mentioned it. It's harder to do at the NFL level. So why is he going to just suddenly get better when he gets to an even more difficult level where snap in and snap out, it's not just your teammates are on the line for, it's your paycheck and everything else that goes along with it. There's more pressure on you to get it right. And I think the thing that gives me a little bit of glimmer of hope is that point that you made about Brian Flores being willing to develop talent over a number of years. And we saw that. We've seen that with Dallas Turner, but the concerns are there certainly about the injuries and the way this team has gone about over the past couple of years, taking these risks on these guys who are injured, not just in the draft, but in free agency. I mean, you look at Okudah last year, bringing him in after he's had plenty of injuries and you only got 6 games out of him. You bring in the veteran defensive tackles. That didn't pan out as well as maybe plenty of people were hoping.
Ryan Kelly certainly hurt a lot. Yep. Yeah, I think with the injury stuff, it is absolutely a way to get more talent than you would have otherwise. Mm-hmm. But there's also a reason for that. So it all falls under the category of risk. Like if we're trying to read the weather, the guy's history is part of the weather. And there is there's like a 40% chance that this doesn't work out because of injury and it sets him back. But then there might be a 60% chance based on their projection or maybe higher that he'll be fine after this ends up working out. And my concern is not for this year. It's really for the long term. And if you have another one after this and it sets you back, and let's say that you're not only available for half of this season or something down the road, then you're just not able to develop. And that's what he needs, because it is not lost on me how freaky this guy is. It is not. Yeah. I watched his combine before he got hurt, but I watched his combine. I was like, okay, that is just something you don't see, is someone that's that big and moves that well. So I get it. I totally get it. But when the head coach goes up there and says, we don't think it's going to be a problem with the injuries. And he does have to get consistent, but he would have been more consistent if he wasn't injured. You're like, okay, man, like maybe Dylan Thieneman would have been fine.
Yeah. By the way,
here's the person complaining about Dylan Thieneman the entire draft season, but the pick, it's got, I think it's a coin flip, the chance to work out. And as I mentioned, Darisaw was supposed to be not physical enough coming out of college, and then he just throws people in the NFL, and he had injuries coming out, and he's turned into a superstar. So
Right.
at 18, this is what happens. If you're picking 5, this doesn't happen. So
I think the reaction might have been different if the draft board didn't also play out the way it did, where you had a number of options that a lot of people were wanting still on the board, and then you go with the guy who's got the injury history. Trade, by the way, for you. Bills trade back again. They are trading, or the Titans are trading up to 31. The Bills are getting 35, 66, 101. So Bills trading back into the second round. Titans trading back up into the first round. Are getting 31, 69, 165.
Haven't the Bills traded back like 3 times or something?
Yeah.
This is an odd approach from them. And then I see Omar Cooper Jr. goes off the board. So they're really trolling their fans about the wide receiver thing, right? They just have no interest.
Meanwhile, the Titans are trading back up in so they can target. Well, they're getting a defensive end, but the report was they were targeting a wide receiver at that spot. But
so I guess the report wasn't right.
Yeah.
Jonathan, I appreciate your input this evening, and we're almost at the 30-second pick, so I want to get these reactions from fans before we sign off for the evening, but thank you for your check-ins, my friend. Keldrick Falk, is who the Titans end up getting here, but I appreciate the insight from you, so thanks for your time, my friend.
Yeah, it's been fun. Always one of the best days of the year, the draft night.
Yes, it is, and it brings energy like no other, and reaction like no other. I do want to just say that one of my favorite stories that I did, or articles, it wasn't really like a deep dive or anything. I rewatched the 03 draft where the Vikings missed their pick. And the fan reaction was rage that you can't, there was missing a field goal to lose a game doesn't have the amount of rage that drafting Kevin Williams came along with, because they not only missed their pick, but they also didn't take Terrell Suggs, and he turned out to be a superstar. So draft night is not the time to be sure of the take. That's for sure. I just think that this here is a little bit on the riskier side than I expected. And I was down on it because I don't think the data speaks well of it. I really don't. I mean, in terms of his movement skills, sure. But in terms of the production and the injury red flags, the history's not great on this, but history doesn't always factor for 6'6" and 330 pounds. So, all right, let's get some of your reaction. And I asked for rational reaction. Joe says this doesn't make sense because most likely if Banks does fulfill his potential, it will be a whole different coaching staff. I don't know about that. I really don't. I don't get any sense that, we talked about, because of the Sam Darnold thing, that KOC, hot seat or whatever else, but after talking to Mark Wilf 2 different times this offseason, I've just not gotten any sense of that. At the owners' meetings, after Kwesi was let go, have not gotten any feeling that there is the same sort of pressure that there might be from us on Kevin O'Connell. I think they really like the way the organization operates. They just paid Brian Flores to be the highest paid defensive coordinator in the league. I don't know if they go 9-8, if they're just going to blow everybody out. So there is that. We also did talk about, and this is why I'm trying to really weigh both sides as well as I can. And I kind of land in the middle a little bit here, because Caleb Banks scares me a lot. And all the podcasts I did leading up to this, I would throw his name out there to different analysts, and they would all have the same sort of, it's a risky one, but, kind of feeling. I have never been on the side of draft for 2026. Draft to try to fill a need right away. Hey, just get this guy because that's the last piece of the puzzle, right? That's how teams end up drafting running backs and making mistakes, or overdrafting Dylan Thieneman. And I think they were right to not overdraft Dylan Thieneman. If they believe that in 2 years, Caleb Banks could be a top 5 player at the position and be worth $25 or $30 million if he was a free agent, okay. Yeah. Then, which it really truly is his upside. He truly has the upside of a top 5 to 7 player. The chances of getting there are just not that high based on the data. But in terms of his actual talent, then it is there. It is in there, talent-wise, skill set-wise. And if he doesn't get there until 2028, are you still a fan then? Because I think you probably are, and I'll very likely be sitting here doing the 2028 draft. So if he ultimately takes 2 years to become a top player, well, then that's still a major hit. But it doesn't feel like something that quite resolves the defensive tackle position either, because you're not really certain about how far is he going to be in his development. He should play right away, but how much is he going to play right away? Can they mix and match the role to make it work, to get him on the field immediately? Probably can, but it's not the type of decision that just resolves a spot. You're all set. It is a player that's going to need some time. I have never been afraid of that. I was the one that was behind, hey, if they like Keldrick Falk, do it, even though he's young, even though he needs development. So that's not really part of my thought process, is that it's going to take a while, because that's okay with me. If next year Dallas Turner becomes great after being good this year, then it's a good draft pick. That's how the NFL works. It's a really hard league, and players don't automatically just become great right away. Big Feller says, in a non-blue chip draft, I'm fine with swinging for the fences. Taking safety at 18 would have been dull. Oh, it's not dull. Especially if you saw the comment section right after it happened. It was not dull. And there were a lot of, the reach thing is real. I mean, these are there are realities here where you have to talk about the things that the historical data says to you. If you go this far against the consensus board, you're putting your life in your hands. If you go this far against the PFF grades at defensive tackle specifically, you're putting your life in your hands. If you are taking a guy who's had injury history, say it with me, you're putting your life in your hands. It's very risky. Historically, there have been a lot of these guys who do not click, but there haven't been a lot of these guys that were not that productive and who did not have the best, PFF grades or whatever, who were this skilled and who were this size. So it might be an outlier, but going for the outlier is risky. And that's the best way to put it. Had they drafted Dylan Thieneman, I would have been okay with it. Just like, okay, I get it. It's fine. It's not a drafted blue chips, as you said. So that's okay. And you got a guy who I think is going to be fine. And I don't think he's worth the 18th pick and all right. So they did draft very much on my side of positional value, which was safety's not worth it here at number 18. And they went for a position that if it hits, it's going to be a monster home run. I use Cam Hayward. Look at that guy and what he has meant to Pittsburgh for so long. You can see Brian Flores saying, oh yeah, I saw what that was like in Pittsburgh. I want one of those. And if it hits, oh my gosh. And I think that they're saying, he could play a little 5 tech because he's quick enough, and that's interesting. He could play over the nose. He could play each gap, which is going to be important to Brian Flores. And you do have to give, he's not perfect, but you do have to give Mr. Flores his flowers when it comes to his ability to evaluate. So I think this is an easy one as Jadarian Price goes to Seattle, as everybody had for a long time. This is an easy one to look into your crystal ball and see it working, because you have a premier defensive coach and a freaky skill set. I just think it might take some patience for this to click if it ever does. Not a Twerk says, coin flip, exactly what you want at 18. Can't wait for the rest of the draft. I don't know if it is exactly what you want at 18. It might be what you feel that you have to do at 18. That's probably a better way to put it. That if you're going to get a top talent at 18, the only way to do it is to have it go along with a lot of risk. And the Vikings have done this, and it has worked. They took a player in Justin Jefferson, who a lot of people said couldn't play on the outside, which sounds hysterical now, but it's true. And so that was the risk. The risk was maybe Justin Jefferson's just a slot guy. That was the risk. And it ended up working out huge. Christian Darrisaw, maybe he's not physical enough. Maybe he's got injury history. Now, the ACL thing was a freak accident, but in terms of what he was, instant star for Christian Darrisaw because he had the freaky talent. And I will concede this, that one of the things we talked about leading up to the draft, and clearly Jermod McCoy, by the way, must have serious issues with his health because he was not taken tonight, and that's crazy. By his talent, it's crazy, not by the injury. Going into the draft, I said, one thing that's missing from this team on defense is freaky talent. If you go through the Vikings defense, you have a lot of guys like Byron Murphy Jr., Josh Metellus, Jalen Redmond, Blake Cashman. Cashman's a pretty good athlete, but even then, he's not quite as big as you would expect for that linebacker. It's a lot of guys who have squeezed every single ounce of talent out of their bodies and their souls. It's not a lot of guys who walk off the bus and you go, oh my God. It's not a lot of Danielle Hunters. It's a lot of guys who have worked super hard and are very intelligent and play with their hair on fire. And those guys are great and they can form a really good defense. But I don't know too many elite defenses that don't have one guy where the other team goes, what are we supposed to do with that? And what the Vikings have done here, if you're playing the talk me into game, what the Vikings have done here is they've gotten the one guy where you'd say, if you're the opposing team, if you are Chicago and you have Garrett Bradbury and you're going up against the Minnesota Vikings in November and Caleb Banks has been developing throughout the season, you're going to be Ben Johnson and go, what do we do with that? Because what Ben Johnson has been able to do against the Minnesota Vikings is block up their blitzes and find answers to their blitzes. This guy doesn't need to blitz. He just is a defensive tackle and is right in your backfield if it works out. So the risk for them, when you have people talking about consistency, it's really scary. I don't like to hear that when you're talking about draft prospects. Well, he's good, but he's inconsistent. Okay, well, hope you can learn that at the hardest level ever. But there isn't a guy on this defense who really scares the opponents, who terrifies the opponents. When teams prepare for the next game, they put something like a star or whatever, a blue dot, whatever it might be, on the guy that they say, we're not going to let this guy beat me. Who is that for the Minnesota Vikings right now? I mean, it's Ben Grenard. They're talking about trading him. That didn't happen tonight. Aside from that, Harrison Smith. And he's 100 and might retire. So, there isn't a lot of that. Purple Faithful says, you have to have elite defensive tackles to win the Super Bowl. Hard to get them without drafting. This is an argument that I think makes a lot of sense, which is that the defensive tackle position, as we have seen. Now, I don't like the data and I don't like the injury history, but it isn't like the analytics pick from his particular numbers, but it is from, if you look at your point is well made. If you look at the teams that have dominated in the playoffs, what do they have? The Texans are 2 passes from CJ Stroud away from being in the Super Bowl. And instead, CJ Stroud melted down. But what do they got? They got freak monsters on the D-line and no one could stop them when they get to the postseason. What did Seattle have? Freak monsters. What did the Eagles have? Freak monsters. What did the Tampa Bay Bucks? How did they beat Kansas City? When you get into the playoffs, how did the Rams beat the ever-loving heck out of the Minnesota Vikings in Arizona in the playoffs? How did they do it? Well, they destroyed them with the interior. So that is an absolute fact. Mick, give it to me. Says, I think with each passing minute, I hate the Banks pick more. See, that's not the rational take I was looking for, but I am a little bit surprised that maybe by how much anger there's been toward it. A little bit, because normally on draft night, people get very excited about their team's draft pick and talk themselves into it. Normally on draft night, people don't get super enraged, which I was maybe not totally prepared for with the chat up on the screen to have the amount of rage. Maybe it's a little bit of an issue that I think about from this perspective when we all become draft analysts during draft season. So we know what the consensus board says, and we know what every person's scouting report says, and all these different things. It can make it a little bit more like we have more certainty than we deserve to have. And it's a fact that the consensus board is pretty telling historically. It just is. If teams that reach have a less chance of succeeding, that's a fact. But at the same time, I think if this same pick was made like 12 years ago, before every person in the world had so many draft resources that we could all be front office members. And I don't even say that flippantly. I actually mean it. We have so many resources in the draft universe that you could draft. I mean, you know, all the players, almost anybody watching, if you've paid attention to draft analysis, and this is what's awesome about the NFL now, you know, the consensus board, you know, the data on the guy, his production, you know, all the stuff. 12 years ago, we would have seen Caleb Banks' height and weight and went, hell yeah, let's go. So, I mean, maybe we do need to keep that perspective in mind a little bit as we evaluate this of like, we can overdo it with the amount of certainty that we have. One thing I know for sure is that you never know. And guys I've thought would be busts have made it, and guys that I thought would make it have been busts. It's just, I think it's all about, if you're making a chart of some kind, you would put like the bar for risk, like an NBA Jam. Yeah, for the old people here who played NBA Jam, if you had like the little bars, how far it went up, the bar for Caleb Banks and risk would be very high up, and the bar for his ceiling would be very high up. And some people are going to like that a lot more than others. Kurt says, if Darnold was here, then the pick would have been Lemon. Seems like the team is aiming to lean on defense after a year with subpar quarterback play. Disappointed Lemon could have really changed the offense. That one's when I spend every draft season talking about the receiver position, and then one of the guys that was ranked in the top 15 by most people is just sitting there. Now, maybe they didn't like how there's like a Lemon joke in here, like it, they made a face or whatever when they met Mekhi Lemon. Maybe they didn't gel with him well. Maybe they didn't think that he was going to fit whatever culture or what. I don't know anything about his personality, but it was strange at the combine, and his interviews are strange. And there were a lot of people who said that he could drop in the draft because of the interview process that didn't go the way people expected it. So maybe the Vikings just thought, I don't know. And Denzel Boston, who I really, really liked and talked about a lot, did not end up going in the first round. So that, who knows, even in the second round, if there's a receiver who ends up being there potentially for the Vikings. But it's just hard to pass up on somebody like Mekhi Lemon. That his level of talent, where he would have fit in on the offense. Once Sadiq was off the board, the Lemon idea was very attractive, because this year, yeah, you need Kyler Murray, but what's going to happen after that? If you have to sign Kyler Murray to a long-term extension, then I don't know how you also sign Addison with Justin Jefferson here, and it becomes a little more complicated. Matt says, think you have a real advantage in your medical staff is pie in the sky BS. Might be a little bit on the aggressive side. There are some teams that have very bad medical staffs around the league that don't grade very well. I think that leaning as heavily as they have on health projections has its advantages and disadvantages over the years. Because I don't want to make it sound like I think that they're not doing a good job. The NFLPA survey has been very clear about that over the years, that the players feel that the Viking staff does a great job. Aaron Jones has just praised the heck out of them, and I believe him. I don't believe that they're magic. I don't believe that they can look into a crystal ball and say his foot's going to be fine. I mean, I think that they could say it should heal properly, but I don't know if they could say that a guy who's had an entire missed season, basically, and then another injury at the combine, that your risk isn't there. It just is. The more times you have injuries, the more it adds up, the more time you miss, the more development you need. Like, there's no question about that. It's kind of like Ryan Kelly going into this year, where, yeah, I mean, your medical staff might feel good about injury X, Y, and Z, but what about the other potential injuries that he could suffer as well? And then it worked for some other players. Jonathan Allen was fine when he, joined the team after an injury the previous season. And there have been other guys who it was not okay with. I think injuries are pretty random overall. but there are guys that you have to admit, 6'6", 330 pounds, and multiple injuries. That just kind of screams like, be careful about someone like that. So I think that your general sentiment is right. It's sort of like you might be leaning a little too heavily on something that's not easy to predict. That's why I like the weather comparison, because the best weathermen are insanely smart. Like Paul Douglas, the guy I follow, he is so good with the weather. And he would tell you, yeah, sometimes I don't get it right because the weather is hard to predict and it changes, and injuries are that way too. Joe says, the only thing I've heard positive about him is that Banks has outstanding character and leadership. His coaches and fellow defenders love him. I know it's a reach, but well, that could absolutely play into exactly what we're talking about here, which is Cam Hayward is probably the comparison. I would make were I a better on one of those weird markets where you could bet on crazy stuff. I'm not into that, but if you are, when does Brian Flores compare him to Cam Hayward? Like first 3 sentences, character matters, work ethic matters. How bad do you want it? It matters. And that I'm sure and would end up playing into it. Is it Sniddly? Or sorry if that that made me laugh in hour number 3 here. What is your grade right now? Mine is B-. It's having a grade is tough. And I will be very interested to see what Chris Trapasso says about this, because he always comes on the show after the draft and gives us his grades on every player. And I think there's a very distinct possibility. So I want to cop out because I don't really love draft grades anyway. I want to cop out and say there's a possibility this becomes like an A, and there's a possibility it becomes a D. So put me in the middle at C+. Put me in the middle at C+. C+ with a very high variance is where I would put it. But B- is kind of where you're at as well. Cold something. Vikings have a great defense. Banks got picked for a reason. I wanted Lee Hunter, but Banks is good. Well, I mean, I know that he got picked for a reason, and I know exactly what that reason is. That reason is he is irreplaceably talented. That you cannot get a free agent like this. You cannot get this level of talent normally, even with the 18th overall pick. Normally, this level of talent is Derek Brooks. Derek Brooks is a good example. No. Who am I thinking of? Derek Brown. Derek Brooks. Derek Brown is the example here. Derek Brooks is a linebacker. Derek Brown, the defensive tackle from the Carolina Panthers. Derek Brown had great production in college, was a freaky run stuffer, was pretty decent at getting after the passer as well. But when you watch Derek Brown play, you go, what the heck is that? How is that man of that size moving that way? You think of Vita Vea for this. You think of Dexter Lawrence for this. And those guys are bigger in terms of weight than Caleb Banks is. But it's the same sort of effect. Akeem Hicks, I mentioned. Kenny Clark, a little less so, but Akeem Hicks was definitely one of those guys where you're like, what in the world is that guy doing to our center? That's what Caleb Banks is. That's why he's drafted. That's what he is from a physical perspective. Brent, who do I think made the decision? What I think probably happened is that they got in their meetings and they went over their reports and they said all around, the only way to get blue chip talent is this. And they have similar rankings. Like, I don't know them exactly, but it's like they call it blue chip for a reason. They didn't just make that up. It's like they have blue chip guy. Like, can this guy be a superstar? And they probably have him as the last guy on their board in this draft who could be a superstar. And they probably looked at Dylan Thieneman as, hey, he could be a solid player, but probably not much more. They might have looked at Mekhi Lemon as being more of a wide receiver 2, but is he going to fit with your culture? There might be something there type of thing with him. I don't know for sure, but there may have been more of a, hey, he doesn't have that blue chip ceiling. Let's just get the best player, regardless of what we think he's going to be right away. And regardless of some of the risk. So, yeah, Darisaw was hurt coming out. And Engelhart, don't be dense on purpose. People do get hurt playing football, but guys who have multiple injuries coming out are more risky than guys that don't. I mean, that's pretty obvious. A guy who you draft him and he can't get on the field right away because he got hurt running at the combine is a little more concerning than somebody who's played 3 years of college football without any injury. Darisaw was hurt coming out and did not get on the field right away, and also has had injury issues throughout his entire career. So I'm not sure that he's actually the best example. Did I say David Boston again? Denzel Boston might have something in the tank. Yeah, David Boston. Oh yeah, somebody else said it. I've done that a bunch of times though. I do not blame you for there. Yeah, I mean, Skoldoc is a longtime listener to the show, and I believe you. I believe you that it would. It's an injury that can heal. It's more about when you've had multiple issues like this. Is that a trend with this player just based on how he's built? That's really the question. And for me, the injury is not even actually the biggest thing. The injury is not even the biggest thing. It's the production. I did a whole article about this. You go see it, purpleinsider.football. I did an entire article about this with defensive tackles specifically. There are a few guys that were Banks' size that did work out. And that was Dexter Lawrence. He was 17th, Banks is 18th. But Lawrence was much better as a pass rusher and one of the best you'll ever see at run defense. And that was just not the case for Banks in 2024. And then this last year, his numbers aren't really great at all. Kevin says Banks, if healthy, was projected to be a mid-first rounder. That's where we took him. So this wasn't a home run swing. I'm not sure that I agree with that because you said we took the risk without upside. That I don't agree with that generally. One is because from every scouting report I've seen, it's the upside is a home run. So the skill set is rare. And I believe in that in terms of taking the big swing, but the odds of hitting the home run are not super high based on the numbers in the history. I think that's kind of where you're going with that is like, it is a big swing. There's no question about it, but what's the percentage chance you actually get there? And then what are you if you don't? Now that's something to talk about too, though. What are you if you don't? Because one of my big issues with Dylan Thieneman was, what are you if you don't become great? You're a very replaceable player. If Caleb Banks becomes okay, let's say he plays 500 snaps and he gets 35 pressures, 4 sacks, and he does a pretty good job against the run, and he's above average player. Is it worth the 18th overall pick? At this position, the answer is probably yes, at defensive tackle, because it's just hard to get those guys. Even average defensive tackles or defensive tackles who are 33, someone brought in Javon Hargrave, the Packers, at a huge price again this offseason after the Vikings overpaid him last year. That just shows you how difficult it is for them for anyone to find the defensive tackle position. Matt, the fact that he didn't have great production, the numbers before the injury is what gets me. That's right. That is my main issue, is that if you are grading by PFF in the 60s and 70s coming out in the draft, it's just a fact of the matter. I mean, all PFF is doing is just watching every play and writing it down. And when you win, they give you credit. And when you don't, they don't. And so if you have Quinnen Williams, a good example, Quinnen Williams had like a 95 pass rush and run defense grade. He's like the best player in the league. And there are guys who are better on the run side than they were pass rush that turned out to be really good. There are not many that were only good at pass rush. Funny enough, that were only good at pass rush, but not good at run defense. Very few have worked out. And when guys didn't grade well on either side, which is Caleb Banks, when they didn't grade way above average, I'm not saying he was terrible, but when they didn't grade way above average on either side, it was pretty much every player didn't work out. So the production there is what would be the most scary. So I think what they're seeing is we've got a development plan for him over a couple of seasons, and that's not going to be something that people have a lot of patience for. Certainly Vikings fans have not been very patient with any rookie that didn't produce right away. Antoine says his upside could make our opponents terrified. That I agree with. His upside could make the Chicago Bears, and the Bears have to be on their mind. The Chicago Bears could walk into a game against the Vikings if Caleb Banks works out and go, what are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to stop that guy? And you know what Brian Flores will do is line him up at the zero tech right over Garrett Bradbury and throw him back into Caleb Williams. That sounds good. That's the upside. That's if it works. Truth Bomb says could have taken the Eagles trade offer and got 115 and 137 and still got Banks. That I don't know, but it might be the case. The trade down thing is very attractive. The trade down thing is when we look at the next bunch of picks, very good edge rushing prospects, Dylan Thieneman, Mekhi Lemon, it's very attractive to trade down. I don't know what phone calls they got, but it is very attractive to trade down. Charles said, if the only way to get blue chip talent is to reach, doesn't that scream trade back? Yes. This would not have been my direction. So it's true that it is the only way to get blue chip talent, and it is how they got Christian Darrisaw. But I tend to agree with you on under these circumstances because Darrisaw, go look at his college production. Holy cow. It's like the best tackle in college football. That's not the case for Caleb Banks. Darrisaw dropped down because he had the injury, and I think he actually dropped down in part because there was reporting about the injury on the day of the draft or something like that. And there was concerns he wasn't physical enough of a player, which, he obviously proved those wrong pretty quickly, but that was one that went along with insane production. This one doesn't. Son of Beavers, you think this is the type of pick that gets scouts fired? No, I don't think that this is what scouts' job is. I think people don't understand what scouts' job is, but I can tell you. So what the scouts are going to do with a player like Caleb Banks is, number one, they're going to find out who Caleb Banks is. That's what scouts do. They go to Florida, they sit down with their coaches, they watch them practice, and they write a report on everything they learn. They talk to people. They talk to people around campus. They talk to whoever they can. People that they trust in a certain building. If you're a Southern scout who's covered Florida, you're going to know a lot of people there. So you're going to find out what the character of the player is like. You're going to find out who their family is, who they're connected to. Is there any concerning people in their circle? Do they have any problems off the field? Where do they go at night? Kind of thing. Like, you're going to find all that stuff out. You're going to also deliver on what their skills are if you're a scout. You're going to watch them play and watch them practice, and you're going to tell the front office, this is what Caleb Banks' skill set is. And you're going to go to the team and deliver the report in the draft meeting. That's your job as a scout. The guys who make the decisions are Rob Brzezinski, Kevin O'Connell, Brian Flores, the Wilfs. Those are the decision makers. The scouts are information gatherers, and they bring it back and they present it. And I imagine that they give their opinions. I don't know how every meeting goes, but that's what they do. So when the Vikings draft Caleb Banks, I would guarantee you his report says inconsistent in his production, and it says that there are probably details of things that go wrong with him for why he doesn't have more production as a defensive tackle and things like that. And then it has character and background and all that stuff, and they present that. And that's what they do, right? That's what a scout does. So when the scouts get blamed for picks, I'm always like, that they're just giving information. The people who make the picks are the decision makers. That's why they're called that. Antoine, there were better players available at 18, but I definitely understand what you're pointing to. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's not another player who was drafted after Monroe Freeling's ceiling's pretty high. That's a Carolina pick right after them. That's a high ceiling player. I don't know that anyone that was drafted after him has a higher ceiling. That if it clicks, this guy is going to be X, Y, or Z. I don't know that anyone has that. I don't even know if Lemon has that. So there's that. So like raw talent, pure talent, he probably has the most of any player after 18. But likelihood of being successful, he might have one of the lowest percentages just based on the historical stuff. Penny says if this keeps B-Flow around 2 more years, that's okay. I think that this team really likes its coaching staff. I also think they're going to win enough games with Kyler and with this defense. I'm very curious to see what they do after June 1st. Somebody asked if this means that they were in on Dexter Lawrence. I would be curious about that. Yeah, for sure. Sauce says we should have traded down if this is who we were getting. I would have been pro trade down here. I definitely would have been pro trade down. Stick to the model gives a C for the pick. It's probably fair. Paul says talent is the wrong word. He has irreplaceable physical characteristics, mid-level talent. Okay, that's fair. That's fair. Actually, I think you're probably right that the talent has not shown itself. Okay. I mean, it's a little nitpicky, Paul, but I get what you're saying. That talent being, I was putting those two together. Like, you just don't find people like this. But in terms of movement, skill, call that talent if you want to. But if you're talking about, Aaron Donald, for example, undersized, but talent-wise was a 10 out of 10, 100 out of 100, whatever you want to say. But maybe didn't have the irreplaceable physical traits. This is the opposite. This is somebody who has irreplaceable physical traits, but has not developed, or maybe we should say raw talent, because I don't think he'd be the 18th overall pick if he didn't have the raw talent. The highlight reel is absurd. I looked at Caleb Banks a lot during this season. We talked about it, and the highlight reel is pretty ridiculous. So I do want to say that the talent is in there. The consistency is talent, though. So I get what you're saying. Brent's giving it a D. Sauce says he's a great player. 4 foot injuries, 3 surgeries. There's wide receivers on the board. He's 6'6", 320. Yeah, there is wide receivers on the board. The 3 surgeries, man. The 3 surgeries is pretty tough. Purple Rain, do we know if the Eagles trade offer for Dallas was on the table for us? I don't know that. I haven't seen anyone say that. Should have traded down. I would have been okay with that. Penny says an A in 2 years, hopefully. That's what they're aiming for, and there's a chance that they get there. But I do think if he becomes a B player, and let's say he plays 550 snaps, and he's like, everything kind of works in PFF grades in my brain. So let's say he's like a 72 PFF player who gets 30 to 40 pressures. That's pretty good. That's going to be worth a lot of money in free agency. Neil, B+, when healthy, Banks is going to be a stud, but it's a massive risk. Just Another Dude goes C-, combo of injury risk player and not exploring trade down when there may have been several after 18. There definitely were. Angel just gives it a C. Not drinking the purple Kool-Aid. Okay, I wasn't asking you to. I've not asked anybody to do that. This wouldn't have been my pick, but I got to present everything, and you got to present the upside to Caleb Banks. That's for sure. The Matt Tracker, it's not an A because you didn't need to take him at 18, even if it works out. Brent, it was a reach. Truth Bomb, why not trade down with the Eagles? We don't know what was on the board for them. A lot of C's, a lot of C-, a lot of D's. I think for me, I would have to go probably C+. Keith, why do we go through this every year? Have you really? Donovan Jackson was the most, everyone was totally fine with the pick. So I don't know if it's every year. SWAT should have taken a safety or corner at 18. Seems like corner would have been a reach. Jermod McCoy was not taken, so there's got to be massive concern there. But safety was pretty much Thieneman, and as I predicted, Emmanuel McNeil-Warren was not taken in the first round. VX, presuming he had a say in the pick, I'm trusting Flores. Oh yeah, Flores would have had a say in the pick. I could see the wheels turning for Flores, and that it is going to push the needle in his direction. Bitter Bruce, for them to take such a huge risk on Banks, Flores must have absolutely loved him. For that reason, I trust the pick a little. Well, that's not a bitter take, Bitter Bruce. Vikings are a joke. That's something I would have expected from Bitter Bruce. Let's see. T-Bay. CBS had Banks ranked 92nd. There was the draft analysis world was not all that high on Caleb Banks going into this. They just weren't. And I think the injury risk was part of it. And I also think that the tape only showed some high-end stuff, but did not show consistency. And that's what they're going to look for. I could take a look here. Let's take a look together at more of sorry, that's just a big blue screen. More from the beast here from Dane Brugler. Let's take a look at the strengths and weaknesses. Officially 6'6.25", 327, and almost 11-inch hands. Oh my gosh. 5.04 40 and a 32-inch vertical jump is pretty crazy. Strengths for Caleb Banks. Rare frame with well-distributed mass, huge hands and exceptional arm length. Natural athlete with raw power and a basketball background. I did not know that. Flashes of quick win potential because of his heavy and fast swipes and clubs. Has quick feet and fluid movement to work laterally or dip his shoulder through gaps. I've seen him do that. He does like kind of a Pat Williams. Remember Pat Williams used to do that? Just kind of dip the shoulder and then like, whoa, there he goes. And guards would be shocked. They'd be like, what the heck? I can't get to him. Banks does that. Gains full extension into contact to latch and pull blockers on skates. He's very strong. Able to lock out blocks and read in the run game. Fights back versus wash down blocks to mind his gap. Competes with consistent effort to chase away from his spot. And scouts describe him as a good person who is slowly but surely finding his voice. Well, that's nice. The Vikings do draft a lot of people that have very high character, like Donovan Jackson. I give him credit for that. That's not sarcasm. I mean it. Weaknesses. Plays tall and can be moved, especially by double teams. That's not great. Hands are active and strong, but wild and aimless, often wild and aimless. Gives blockers a big target to get the upper hand with body position and leverage. Most of this stuff sounds like technique, and that's my guess at why they were okay with drafting him. Like they think that they can coach the technique because this is all technique stuff. Like taking on double teams is technique. Hand placement and active usage of hands, total technique. Giving blockers a big target, all this stuff. Wears down on drives. Injuries could have affected conditioning. Not great. Uninspiring career production with 10.5 tackles for loss, 6.5 sacks, and then the injury and then the other injury. So that's the weaknesses for him. And I'm not going to read the entire background. I just scrolled it if you want to do that, or just go get the beast. So let's do this to wrap up the evening, and hopefully you guys have had a good time. I will run through the draft board real quick, a little rapid fire, and then let's see. Just want to shout out Jack for the huge super chat. Thank you so much, Jack. Really appreciate that. Not necessary, but always appreciated. So let me run down the draft board real quick before we call it a night, and we'll take a look at some of the best players available for tomorrow. And then I want to check in on what FanDuel has for their odds as well, because they are a wonderful sponsor of the show. So what have they got up there right now for us to look at? So let's go rapid fire here. The start of the draft threw us a little bit of a twist at number 3 with a shocking pick from Arizona. I am not giving the Arizona Cardinals the benefit of the doubt for anything, but I think Jeremiah Love will eventually be really good for the next team that he plays for after Arizona wastes his first contract. Carnell Tate, one of the best picks of this draft. Tennessee did it right. They got a potential star wide receiver for their quarterback. The Giants, they may look bad because they traded Dexter Lawrence, but they got Arvell Reese and Francis Mauigoa, guard to put in and build the offensive line around Jackson Dart, a dynamic chess piece, if you will, to go along with a bunch of talent on their D-line. Great job by the Giants. Chiefs trading up for Mansour Delane. Probably not the best use of their assets, but they needed a corner desperately. Steal of the draft, maybe Sonny Styles at Washington. He was projected by a lot of people higher. Ends up with the Commanders. Jordan Tyson, a bit overdrafted by some people, but I like getting a weapon for their young quarterback. Spencer Fano will be blocking for absolutely nobody. And congratulations to him on going to Cleveland, a prospect I really, really like, and pray for Spencer Fano at the 9th overall pick. Caleb Downs, the not shocking safety drop that we bet on every single year and happened again, but Dallas moving up that one spot to get him. I mean, they get, I don't know if it's a steal, but they get a really, really good player to build on their defense. Caden Proctor is a huge risk for a team in Miami that needs hits. The guy who's 350 and there's worries about his conditioning always scares me a bit. Ty Simpson, probably the shock of the draft. The Rams not doing anything to help Matthew Stafford is a little bizarre to me. I think that if I were in Sean McVay's shoes, and he must plan on coaching for a long time, what I would be doing is I'm going to take 2 more shots at this with Matthew Stafford, and then I'm going to go be a broadcaster and make $15 million a year having nice hair. That's what I would do. But I'm not Sean McVay. Let's see. Ravens took the most obvious guy. Reuben Bain with the big drop to number 15. So Tampa Bay feels good about him. The Vikings, we'll never know. Would they have taken Kenyon Sadiq? The Jets get him. The obvious pick from the Detroit Lions, Blake Miller. I really like Blake Miller. Tons of production, tons of performance, great athlete. I think he's going to be a good starting offensive tackle. Then the Vikings go Caleb Banks, Monroe Freeling, and an easy pick for Carolina, another high tackle. Trading up for Mekhi Lemon, that A.J. Brown deal is locked in, isn't it? that is all set, but that might be a steal right there. Messidor going 22, Malachi Lawrence projected by a lot of people in the second round, ends up with the first round with Dallas, so they do a lot to rebuild their defense. Again, the Browns, pray for this guy, KC Concepcion, because I have no idea who's throwing you the football, dude. Dylan Thieneman, you're going to have to play him twice a year in Chicago. So we'll see how that plays out. That'll be something we'll remember for sure. Is the year that everyone mocked the wrong guy to the Vikings and he went to the Bears. And then the end of the draft had a bunch of trades. Kalen Rutledge overdrafted, I thought, by a lot by the Houston Texans as they try to rebuild their offensive line. The Miami Dolphins also probably reached a bit on Chris Johnson, but I like him. The Patriots have bigger things to worry about. Peter Woods goes 29. I'll be curious to watch how Peter Woods plays out versus Caleb Banks. The Jets got Omar Cooper probably later than people expected. Keldrick Falk goes 31 to the Titans, and Jadarian Price now off the board as he goes 32. So here's the best players available, and there are a lot of them, folks. And this is what I wanted to point out is I get it, the reaction. I'm part of it, but there is a second round this time. Last year there wasn't. This year there is. There is another pick on the way. So Jermod McCoy is the guy to watch. Where is he going to fall to with this knee injury? Avion Terrell, I have him targeted, but usually corners go early in the second. Denzel Boston, very curious how this plays out. Emmanuel McNeil-Warren, the Vikings could still could still potentially get Emmanuel McNeil-Warren if he drops a bit. Caden McDonald did not go in the first round. Colton Hood, I've got my eyes on for the Vikings second round. Edge rushers, lot of good edge rush talent in the second round. Love that potential for the Vikings. TJ Parker, Cassius Howell, Zion Young, Brandon Cisse, another corner. So corners, D'Angelo Pons, another one. Corners and edge rushers are everywhere in the second round. So are linebackers. Jacob Rodriguez didn't go. Neither did Anthony Hill. There's some opportunities there. Another edge rusher, R. Mason Thomas, very productive. Gabe, I think it's Jacques. Maybe someone who went to Illinois can tell me the pronunciation, but he is another one, very highly productive. Jake Golday I've talked about. And then we get into the wide receivers, Jeremy Bernard, Chris Brazel, AJ Halsey, another safety, Eli Stowers, if they want to go the tight end route. There is and Traden Stukes was kind of like a quiet, maybe he'll be a first rounder. There is a lot of second round talent, my friends, for the Vikings to look at. A lot of these guys, some people had going even potentially in the first round. There's, if you see here on, can you see it? Okay, you can. On Stick to the Model, where they were expected to go. And McCoy was 16th. But look how many guys were in the top 32. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 were in the top 32. And then there's a bunch of guys that could potentially go somewhere in the top 50. So look, there's a lot of options here for the Minnesota Vikings. So I guess my advice on this one would be patience, my friends, because we're not going to know whether Caleb Banks is a home run hit or a strikeout probably for a little while. He's got to get healthy. And from what it sounds like and what it looked like on tape, he's got to learn to play football. And that's going to take some effort from Brian Flores. It's going to take some effort from their defensive line and coaching staff. and other players, but they're all young on that D-line. The defensive line coach is going to have a lot to work on with Ingram Dawkins, with Elijah Williams. I mean, they're going to have a lot of young talent there that if it works out, they can have a deep and young and gifted room at defensive tackle. But it might not be right away. And I think they may have to go out in free agency and find another defensive tackle to help them out who's a veteran, because asking Banks to step in right away might be a lot. And trying to determine whether he's reached his ceiling or not during training camp, during the first 6 weeks of the season, I just don't think we're going to really know with this guy. So what we'll be looking for is the flashes, the talent, the natural gifts, how he translates that over, and then the health. They believe in something here, that there is a high-end potential of Caleb Banks, and they would not have drafted him if they did not believe in that high-end potential. Whether he reaches it is now suddenly a story going forward for the Minnesota Vikings, and this is the type of freaky talent that they just don't have a lot of. Dallas Turner has it. I'm not sure anybody else does on the entire defense. So they've got it, but now they have to hone it in order for it to work out. So this will be something that we'll be covering closely, watching closely, and seeing how it plays out. But the Vikings here did something that I truly did not expect, which was they took a big risk. They reached versus the consensus board massively, which when, Rob Brzezinski was talking about knowing what mocks are saying and things like that, I thought, oh, and they're using some of the consensus data, and then they went wildly against it. And it does make you wonder. This will leave us questions. Every single draft, one of the great things about it, one of the wonderful things about the draft, why we love it so much, is that it always leaves us with more questions than answers walking out of it. What is Mekhi Lemon going to be in Philadelphia? Does Jonathan Grenard was not traded tonight? Does he get traded tomorrow? Can the Vikings in the second round take safer players to fill spots, which allowed them to take the big swing at Caleb Banks? What did other teams offer to trade up? Where did they actually have Dylan Thieneman? Would they have taken Kenyon Sadiq had he gotten to them? All sorts of questions coming out of it. I will say that I had a really, really fun time with all of you guys tonight, even though the reaction was a little on the aggressive side and some of you spoiled the pick, but it was a really, really fun time. Oh, I had promised to look at some FanDuel stuff real quick before I officially say goodbye. So they've got, okay, let's take a look real quick. But then I'll say a goodbye. But I really did want to say thank you to everyone in the chat who followed along and everyone who watched. There's a lot of places you could pick to watch your draft analysis tonight, and I'm so thankful and happy that you picked here. But let's take a look just real quick at what FanDuel has up for the draft here. So far, like the skill players, they've got the skill players for rookie over-unders. Fernando Mendoza passing touchdowns 16.5. I would go under because I don't think he's going to play a ton right away. Carnell Tate over-under 750.5 yards receiving. I would go over there. And I would also, I'd go probably under Jordan Tyson, 805 receiving right away from New Orleans. That's interesting. Kenyon Sadiq, okay, his over-under is for the Jets, 500.5. I wonder what that would have been if he went to the Vikings. And Mekhi Lemon, those are the guys we'll be watching, over-under 700.5, which I'm going to shoot for the over on that. So that's just a kind of a check of where FanDuel is at after night number one. But here's the good thing, my friends. If you enjoyed the coverage this evening, guess what? I'm going to go drink some Diet Dr. Pepper. I'm going to write over at purpleinsider.football my written reaction and analysis, and then I'm going to prep for day 2. So I'll be back right at the beginning of day 2, Minnesota Vikings coverage, and we've got draft picks. We're going to have a lot of fun with it. We'll have multiple opinions. Maybe we'll get a trade thrown in there. Who knows what comes next? And I would imagine that we'll get an in-person press conference from Caleb Banks. Usually that happens after the draft. So if we get that, of course, I'll be there at TCO Performance Center, and off we go. It's draft season, baby. It's not over yet. And then day 3, I'm going to wait for it to play out. Then after day 3 is over and they've made their final pick and we've done our final press conference, I'll do a live show as well. Can't give you any more of my soul than that, my friends. So thank you so much again for everybody who joined tonight. I had a ton of fun. The NFL draft never fails to deliver, and we will see you tomorrow night.